Okay.
I just,
Sorry, for some reason I thought you weren't going to be here, but now they reminded me you were on the video.
Hey, where did those come from?
Surprise!
You did?
Thanks for being here, Jai.
Yep. Hi, everybody.
Just set them right here, Lisa.
So we do have a bit of a long meeting tonight. If everything kind of flows the way it's supposed to according to our agenda. The city did order us dinner tonight, so we're able to do that. I think they went beyond pizza.
Happy Meals.
I was hoping for adult Happy Meals, but Carter surprised us.
I had heard that McDonald's was low bid, so.
But anyway, so we'll do that here shortly. We'll get started into the meeting, and then we'll take a short break and get some dinner and come back and start working. And we'll try to get everybody home, including staff as well,
By
as quickly
midnight.
as possible as well. So, okay, let's go ahead and get started right away. We're already a couple minutes behind, but council meeting follow-up. We sales tax discussion. I think that's going to go to Jill. But Carter, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir, and good evening, everybody. This is a follow-up item, not only with respect to some conversation that the council has had, but in regards to conversation that your finance committee has had, and requested that this information be shared with their colleagues among the council. So that's why we're here this evening. This discussion really is not intended to be a long presentation or encyclopedic as it relates to sales tax information and the science behind Wyoming tax law and all that kind of thing. So this is really just a demonstration intended to talk about how much of a sales tax dollar the city actually gets into its coffers. And so if you'll keep that context in mind, hopefully you won't be disappointed with the brevity of what we have for you tonight. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn the time over to our CFO to walk us through that, that'd be great.
Yes, Jill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. As the city manager has already said, sales tax is very important to our city. It's one of the biggest revenue sources that we receive, and this presentation is just meant to kind of show you how it's all allocated between all the different stakeholders throughout the state. So, going pretty quickly, this is just kind of an example. So if we were to take $2,000 for the sales, at 4 cents on the dollar, we would collect $800 in sales tax. So the state of Wyoming, if you see this big yellow pie slice, they take most of it. So they take 69%. The other 31% is divided amongst everybody else. So if we were to look at how this actually works, so if we have $1 that we bought something, if you look at the state, they're going to take their 69%, plus they actually get 1% of an admin fee for that other 31%. So they get a little bit more than that 69%. So out of every 4 cents, they would get 2.77 cents. Okay, City of Casper, we're going to get 21%, 21.9%, so almost 22%. So we don't even get quite a penny out of all of that tax that's collected. Natrona County has a guaranteed allocation of 1%, plus they also get a percentage based on population. So they're going to get 0.2 of 1 cent. And then of course the other incorporated cities in town will get the rest of it. So this allocation is based on population. So it doesn't matter where you spend your tax dollars in Natrona County, the city is going to get a portion of that. So if I buy something in Natrona County, the city is still going to get the portion that is allocated to them. It's based on population. The population that comes off the census, this allocation will be in place for the next 10 years. Okay? So if we were to look at the local option, this is actually really cool. So the local option is our 1 cent, which is coming up on the ballot. But you'll see the state of Wyoming on this one, it's a very small percentage. They only get that 1% of the, what do you call it? The Admin fee. Admin fee, thank you. So we get all of the rest of it. And that's divided amongst all of the incorporated cities and towns, the county, and of course the city of Casper. The city of Casper will get 73% of that penny. So that's pretty cool. So if we look at this one, again, we're going to take our 1%, the state is gonna get that very small amount. City of Casper is still gonna get less than 1 cent because it's the 1 cent. So we're gonna get 7/10 of a cent. Natrona County will get their portion, and then the other cities and towns will get their portion. Again, still based on population, and that will be in effect for the next 10 years. So now, if we look at kind of just a fictitious scenario, how can we put this all together? So, if you look at the scenario, we're gonna say, somebody comes to city council and they want us to invest $1 million in one of our facilities to do something, to have more events, okay? We're gonna estimate that they're gonna do 5 events in a year, about 1,000 people per event, about $200 spent per person. Okay, total estimated economic increase would be $1 million. That's really awesome, $1 million, that looks great. Really doesn't, because we only get 4% in sales tax, so we get $40,000 out of that $1 million. So then, the city of Casper gets their 21% or 22%, so they get $8,769. Then if we look at our optional 1 cent, we get $10,000 from that, off that $1 million, and the city of Casper will get $7,310. So the total that we would get out of that economic increase would be about $16,000. Okay, so in order to get that covered, it would take us 62 years based on that number to recover that money. So I'm not saying that sales tax should be the only thing that should influence your decision on what projects that you take on, but just be aware that people come in with these large economic impact dollars, and it really translates into small dollars to the city. Okay, I want to look at one more. This is a real life one. So we actually looked at CNFR, and Pete helped me with these, so that was great. We made some assumptions based on how many people come into town and where they stay and where they eat and that type of thing. So we also looked at the Ford Wyoming Center gets a lot of revenue from CNFR. And then there's some non-Ford Wyoming Center revenue. So we looked at both of those. So if we kind of apply our same chart, we're gonna look at our taxable sales, it's gonna be 1.7 million. Our state share, the city of Casper will get $15,000 out of that, 15.5. On our 1 cent, we're gonna get approximately this. City of Casper will get about almost 13,000. So the total sales tax generated from CNFR, based on this scenario, is gonna be about $28,000. So it's not huge. So then let's go one step further. So the city actually allocates expenses out of its budget. The fiscal year 23 budget has 2 line items. We have $20,000 for a sponsorship, and we also have $30,000 as an additional funding for CNFR for the Ford Wyoming Center. So if we look at this, that's our sales tax. This is our commitment. We're actually losing money. Again, that wouldn't be the only reason why we would look at CNFR, but just be aware that when we look at economic impact, how that translates to sales tax dollars is not large. And that's really all I got.
Joe, may I have, can you put that back up there, please?
Of course. Which one you
That
want to
one.
see?
So the important thing for folks that are watching today is, although that's a loss to the city with sales tax revenue, we have to keep in mind that CNFR brings $14 million into our community. So our private business sector feasts off of this. The hotels, the restaurants, the retail stores. So although the city's taking a loss in the sales tax aspect, we as a council approve that $50,000 expenditure to bring this to our city because of what it does as a whole. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
Kyle.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks for the info, Vice Mayor. Point of clarification, I thought CNFR was $2 million in economic impact, and it was the high school sports that was $15 million a year.
And you very well could be right, Kyle. But even if it is just $2 million, for me, it's worth the $50,000 that we allocate to this to bring $2 million into our private business economy. So you are probably correct, and I appreciate the correction. Thank you.
Of course.
Go ahead.
This is right on the cusp of going over my head, so I'm trying to dig my claws into it. The couple previous slides where it was talking about the economic impact of the Ford Wyoming Center based on their food and beverage and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So how does total Ford Wyoming Center revenue, how does that impact our subsidy How does that bake into the calculations in regards to economic impact of the city specifically?
Great question. So it doesn't impact our subsidy. So how the Fort Wyoming Center is set up as far as budget is we allocate the subsidy to the Fort Wyoming Center. The Fort Wyoming Center runs an operating account for all of their events. And then at the end of the year, we true it all up to say how much did you make and did we make any money, and that should offset the subsidy. That's how we do that. So as far as this one particular item, it probably doesn't impact it at all. We look at it as a whole.
So this 714,000 goes into a pot of all their other revenue generated by events at the end of the year. After you account for expenses, what's left over ends up being our subsidy essentially?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Bruce.
We could even break that down into an individual thing. They didn't net 714,622 off of that because we have employees and we have hauling dirt in and out, and I mean just all of it. But
Yes,
anyway,
this is just the revenue side.
correct.
That is correct.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill.
Any questions, comments for Jill, Carter, anybody? Okay. Thank you so much for that presentation, Jill.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay, moving on. Anti-discrimination ordinance. Carter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a body of work that council has been anticipating for some time. Many of you were on the council during the time that an anti-discrimination resolution was brought before the council. That probably would have been 3 years or so ago. Of course, that generated not only a lot of public dialogue, but certainly additional sort of ancillary discussion among the council that, in my opinion, led to the appointment of an advisory committee representative of the LGBTQ community, and additional discussion from there. It wasn't too long after that the LGBTQ community and the advisory committee came forward to the council and suggested some ideas and concepts and discussions that council should consider. One of those was with regard to taking the next step beyond a resolution and going into an ordinance discussion and considering proposals as it relates to organizing law that would secure the belief that our community should be anti-discriminatory. Pursuant to that proposal that our advisory committee brought forward, and with regard to corresponding direction from the city council of the day, which would have been, as many as 2 years ago by now, perhaps. Staff got to work, primarily Mr. Henley's office, with the advisory committee, and had a number of discussions regarding proposals, regarding language, and certainly drafts handed back and forth. The advisory committee put a lot of work into language and internal discussions in their group. That leads us to where we're at today, wherein you are considering a draft ordinance that deals with anti-discrimination and a law, ostensibly, if it were to pass, that would not allow discrimination and discriminatory practices in our community in a number of categories and in a number of environments. The challenge that council will have is with regard to determining whether or not this ordinance is generally reflective of your will, reflective of what it is that you'd like to see take place, and certainly whether or not it goes far enough or whether or not it goes too far. And your challenge will be to guide staff with respect to what you want to see come forward in a formal setting on the floor from here. Now, I would tell you that if indeed when you look at this and have your discussion this evening, your direction will be to take it back and do some more homework and those kinds of things before it comes forward in a first reading setting. That's absolutely fine if that's what council would like to see happen. Otherwise, we would anticipate that given what it is you tell us tonight, we would likely bring this forward here in the next few weeks in a public hearing setting and a first reading scenario. And as you know, we would have 3 readings of an ordinance proposal that ostensibly would come into some sort of law to be codified in your ordinances. That is the context, and I should tell you, Mr. Henley and the advisory committee did a really good job of looking at what models are out there here in Wyoming that have passed and that are in the books, as it were. 2 notable ones that you may be familiar with. The city of Laramie passed one a number of years ago. Cheyenne more recently passed one as well. And we believe, or at least I do anyway, that what you're reading tonight is kind of a hybrid of both of those for you to consider. I, however, am not the expert on the mechanics of what you have in front of you tonight. And so if it pleases the council, I'd really like to defer some time to Mr. Henley to walk you through some of those mechanics and go into questions and discussion.
I'll put you in first. Or do you want to ask now?
Well, I might ask because then he can touch on this.
Okay.
It's just, when I was reading this, I'd seen this kind of as a twofold. So I guess part of it is I can understand the city ordinance side, but aren't we also broaching into Department of Labor things? So,
Good, John.
yeah, sorry, I'm not looking at Carter.
Yeah, no, that's,
I'm looking
that's
through
kind of what I
Carter to
thought.
you.
Yeah.
Testing? Do you know if that makes any difference?
It makes a difference out in the TV.
Okay, very good. All right, well, great. Well, thank you, and thank you for that question. That question is actually a very good lead-in because we were looking at the ordinances, and actually the original ordinance that we were kind of looking at, or ordinances, were from Jackson and Laramie, and they really touched more on the public accommodations, housing, and employment question or portions of the draft ordinance that you have before you. And those, in fact, of course, there are provisions within the federal law that deal with all 3 of those things. And in fact, then the federal ordinance permits the states to come in and also do their own work on those instead of having everything go to the EEOC. Some things stay with the Fair Labor Standards Board here in Wyoming, and they will investigate, they will do a conciliation when there are those type of issues presented to them. And then if that works out, then the case goes away. If it doesn't work out, the person who's filed the charge with the EEOC that should go to the Fair Labor Standards Board has an opportunity to receive a right to sue letter, and then that individual can bring a lawsuit in federal court. So those are there. The difference is here is that with respect to these 3, this would be a violation of a Casper city code. It's not a civil remedy like you would see in a federal EEOC claim or one that was prosecuted by the state or administered by the state for a violation of the housing or employment or public accommodation laws. And in addition, this would have some immediacy effect. You know, one of the reasons I wanted to attach the that little timeline regarding the Bosler case versus County of Georgia was that how things go to the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, are that you'll have circuits that differ in their opinions, and so we had 3 different cases that went up on that one, and the Supreme Court reached its decision, but guess what? 2 of the 3 people that brought those claims had passed away. It just took that much time to go through the machinations of the federal filing, going through the hearings, going through the conciliation, going through this, going through that. And so they really received nothing. I mean, I guess their heirs would receive some money. But I think that was one of the concerns that was brought to us by the council, your council, your commission, to advise you, is that, you know, we have these people and they don't want to be engaged in some lengthy period of time, but they don't want to have their rights kind of stepped on simply because the other side can outlast them, or because, you know, in Wyoming we're a pretty small state with small employers, and because of small employers, you know, we have a lot of employers that are less than 15 employees, and federal laws don't apply to those employers or entities that have less than 15 in their workforce. And so for that reason, there were, I thought, well-articulated comments by the committee that this would be something that would help a lot of people within the state that were visiting Casper, or people that lived in Casper, that really don't see that they have an opportunity to go through and file something with the EEOC, which is a pretty daunting thing. And then if you don't prevail there, then you're off to federal court, which is a real daunting thing. So they were hoping for something, and obviously Jackson and Laramie came through and provided some release in that regard. Now, those two ordinances were concerning, I think, from a couple of different ways, in that they didn't focus, if it's going to be an ordinance, if you look at state statute, basically ordinances are enforced by the municipal court system. And in those particular drafts of ordinances and what became ordinances, there's actually kind of an administrative process before people can go to the municipal court. And so in that regard, I felt it was important that we make ours differentiated from Jackson's and Laramie's. And so we put in there that people would just be able to go ahead, and we'll actually have the police department, which is used to doing investigations, do the investigation, and then make a determination whether they believe they can prove that by a probable, beyond a reasonable doubt. And it gets prosecuted and it gets decided quickly by our judge, and the whole thing can be taken care of in 6 weeks, at least initially, unless there's an appeal. And in addition, it's kind of quick and timely. And also then, if you have an employee or employer, with less than 15 employees, they would also be subject to this, which they would not be subject to under federal law. And so, so we do have kind of that dichotomy. This, in a lot of ways, incorporates the same exceptions that you'll find in federal law. And so if you see in that last paragraph that we have, paragraph F of the proposed ordinance, we have just innumerable, it seems to me, for most, at least municipal ordinances, exceptions. And so if you look at that, things that are recognized in federal law, things which are constitutional, they're all exceptions. And we've tried to list those out, and we've used other ordinances. One from Jackson, as a matter of fact, they had revised theirs recently, and they have a number of these type of exceptions. And then we looked at federal law, too, to make sure that some of the exceptions they have were included within this ordinance for the 3 types of violations that are referenced and were originally brought to you by your committee. So that kind of covers the last part of the ordinance, dealing with the fair housing, public accommodations, and employment. The first 3 violations, though, we talk about really were kind of generated from a take and a reading of Cheyenne's ordinance. And in fact, that was kind of brought to our attention by the committee, but also by some of your council members, fellow council members, who had gone to Cheyenne for, I think it was some type of a meeting down there. And they came back and they'd had a presentation by Cheyenne on their ordinance. And those were really about physical, more hate crime type of things. So it's one thing if I go out and I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, I might get beat up. But if I go out and I'm always going to be, you know, gay or black or brown or whatever, and somebody's out to get me because I'm gay or black or brown or whatever, then that becomes a hate crime. And so instead of just having what we have for those other three, simply a fine of up to $750 if it's proved beyond a reasonable doubt, for these we have kind of a enhanced crime. And so for a regular assault or battery or an incitement to hurt someone under our current ordinance, first offense, it's a $750 fine. Now, the second offense, it will go $750 fine, and then the judge has the discretion to impose some type of an incarceration defense up to 6 months. So instead of having two steps, if it's a hate crime and you're just not in the wrong place at the wrong time, but because you're being beat up because of your color or your traits or your sexuality, then that becomes an enhanced crime. And if it's proved, then the judge has the discretion to fine you up to $750 and also potentially incarcerate for up to 6 months in jail, which is the maximum jurisdiction that the municipal courts have. And so those were kind of the thought processes behind this. It took a good amount of time to kind of come to that, but I do think I'm glad that we spent that much time, just because I think it's a work product that kind of is in between the two different ordinances that folks liked, and which I think seem to be kind of consistent with good rationale behind the people that were promoting this. So.
So I guess how I kind of want to proceed maybe is, I know there's a couple people with questions. I do want to recognize there's three members of the advisory committee here, which I want to welcome them and thank you for being here, and I appreciate that. Which I'll open that if they have some the process that went through that. I know Kate did an extensive amount of work. She's an attorney here in town. She did an extensive amount of work with it as well, and partnered a little bit with John in helping to craft it and looking at that. So it took quite a bit of time to put it together, and I know John, who is very careful on that, took a lot of that. And so maybe what I'll do is let's start with questions, and then we can have some discussion around the table to see where we want to move. We have an hour allotted for that, so I would like to take as much time or little time. Council's ready to give thumbs up or questions, whatever, but I thought we'd do that if that's good with everybody. Okay, Bruce.
Thank you. So I want to be clear with the public, especially first off, that regardless of your color, your sexual orientation, whatever it is, you have a right to be treated with dignity. You have a right to be treated with respect. I've had some people in the community reach out to me and ask me, why do we need hate crime legislation in Casper, Wyoming? Try being different or having a different view, and I don't even want to say people that they're different. Maybe different than the mainstream, but try wearing that hat one day and see how people treat you and the things they say to you and the things they do to you. And me personally, I don't want to live in a world like that. I don't want to be part of it. And I think if you want to go around bullying and being mean to people that are different than you, then you should have to pay a price for it. So I'm 100% behind this. I went to one of the meetings. I helped draft some things that didn't end up being in there, so that's probably good too, I suppose. But I've changed my views, and I've learned to be more accepting of different than me or different than what I think. It doesn't mean that it's right or it's wrong or anything else. It just means that people should be treated with respect and with dignity, regardless of how they view things. And if it takes legislation like this to put a stop to the hate and the discrimination, then I'm all for it, 100%. So that's where I'm at. I think that's where most of the council's at. And I want to thank the LGBTQ group that came together and put all this. I know Ray put a lot of work into it. I know our city attorney certainly did, and Amber and some of the other folks. So kudos to you, because this has been a long process, arduous process, and so I appreciate what's came out of it. I hope it moves our city into a better direction and makes it a safer and more kinder place for people to live.
Thanks, Bruce. Anybody else want to say anything? Kyle.
Thanks, Mayor. John, question for you. I imagine there's some folks that would have a concern that this could be loosely applied in pretty much any situation. Could you please speak to the burden of proof that would be required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that an act of violence was perpetuated based on somebody's traits outside their control? Could you give an example maybe of what that burden of proof would look like? Thank you.
No, I think that's a good question. I appreciate it, and it kind of goes back to Councilwoman Engelbrettson's earlier question about the dichotomy. Remember, in your EEOC filings, it's simply a matter of preponderance of the evidence. Those are civil cases. This is a criminal case. This is basically what a municipal court is. So it has to go beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, the way you look at that, we can't read people's mind. Did they do that because of your color, or was it just because they were having a bad day? And so, actually, those are pretty hard cases to prosecute. And the policemen who investigate it, the witnesses who hear it or witness the assault, those are probably going to be key in making that determination, because they're going to hear the utterances as the blows are being hit, or they are going to know the individual who has been at least investigated and say, oh yeah, this guy was on a terror that night, something had offended him, and he was out to punch somebody out who was gay because he saw a news article that drove him nuts. Those are the type of things. You just don't do this willy-nilly. I guarantee you have a judge for a reason, and the judge is going to be looking at this. You have an appeal process for a reason, and you have a high burden of proof for a reason. So this is a lesser burden of proof, though hopefully a lot lesser obstructionary process if you do have a problem.
Yeah, go to Kyle.
Thank you, John. So safe to assume that you would have very little luck with the prosecution if it was simply he said, she said. The act has to be very overt. There's got to be like supporting statements or multiple witnesses. I mean, it has to be, verified a number of ways probably before you could meet that burden.
Basically, and if you think about the criminal process, it's multi-layered before it ever sees the judge's desk, even before a warrant is issued or a subpoena is issued. So the officer is called in, they're advised of it, they have to conduct their investigation. Based upon their investigation, they analyze the law with the facts. They make that determination initially. Do we think that we have enough facts to comport with the law to support a charge that can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt before our court? They then write that up, their reasons for it, submit that to the city attorney's office. I will, our prosecutor Jackie will, or our deputy Wallace will all review those, one of us, three, not all of us, for each one, those informations that are written by the police department, the police officers who are investigating this, and then we make a determine whether it's sufficient under our review, particularly for facts as they comport with the law, and whether that's sufficient to actually take this to court. And absent that, if we don't sign it, if we send it back, then it doesn't go any farther than that. And of course, if the police department doesn't believe that they can prove it, it doesn't even make it to our desk.
Thank you. Lisa.
So I did have somebody ask me this question, and I didn't find this answer in here. What if somebody from the LGBTQ community was also picking on somebody else in the LGBT community, and they were both equally kind of just being ugly to each other, and then they started telling on each other? Does this get escalated up, or is this just a normal harassment charge? Like, how does that work?
It's hard to see where the thought process would be that conduct was because the other was of a protected characters or characteristics. And so because I have this characteristic and then the person I'm in the spat with has those same characteristics, seems like, you might be able to say, yeah, he or she assaulted me, but for that extra, it seems to me that almost any officer would say, you're claiming that this occurred because you were black. Well, the other person was black too. It sounds like this is just a regular fight or situation where you ticked somebody off and then they got ticked off too. So, it's hard to know without looking at the people and hearing their stories, but at least is a rule of thumb, I think that would be the analysis that you would use, kind of given those broad set of facts.
One of the things I like about this ordinance is it's broad, and the protection, since we don't really have a statement in the city ordinance of non-discrimination, and it identifies, malicious harm based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, national origin, or disability. And I think that is a broad statement. And so while this is certainly been brought forward by the LGBTQ Advisory Council, to me, it's also a statement on non-discrimination across the board in our community, and that we do that. So for me, this makes sense. We're one of few states, and I don't know the exact number, that does not have a hate crimes legislation. I think we're one of two. So we're one of two in the United States that does not have hate crimes legislation, which I think is telling. And so what I have seen is the municipalities taking it upon themselves to look at trying to create some type of legislation that would protect everyone and create a place where we can protect individuals that are in a minority or at risk, if you will. So I think that's going to be incredibly important for us to dictate that. And what I don't think is fair is for us to just blanketly call it the LGBTQ non-discrimination. This is a non-discrimination in our community that I think standing for that is incredibly important. So, Bruce and then Amber.
Well, let's be clear. This isn't, one of the comments I got was, oh, we're giving them special treatment. This is about being respectful to people, to all people. This isn't about one certain group of people. This is about us as a city and as a council and as a population sticking up for those that are being bullied. And people are getting bullied every single day. I mean, I remember being in school and the chubby kid getting bullied, or the kid with freckles getting bullied, but it's gone so far beyond that now. Now it's because of what you believe in or what you want to be in your life. And at some point, we got to put a stick in the ground and we got to stand up for people. And it's the right thing to do. And we don't need hate crimes legislation. Yes, we do. Until you are on the other end of that hate, it doesn't register with you. This is simply the right thing to do, period, for everyone. Not just for one community, it's for everyone. That's all I have.
Thank you. I don't have much to add, but I would just like to draw the council's attention to something that I'm really pleased, one element of this that I'm really pleased with, and that's how comprehensive it is. I think that it was a very long process. The advisory council and John's office spent many hours to come to this product. But I'm very pleased that it addresses both the non-discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations, in addition to sort of the bias crime angle, which is something that this council has asked the state to take up as an issue in previous through WHAM, and so I think it aligns with some of the other things that we've been trying to do, and very pleased to see that we're not taking a sort of piecemeal approach, but have put together, taken the time to be thoughtful and put together something that really kind of creates the comprehensive types of protections that we should hold as a standard in this community. So thanks to everyone who put the time in to get us to that point. staff and the advisory council and the city council folks who have been helping as well, and former Vice Mayor Friel was also involved, so thanks to him as well.
Questions? See,
It's not a question, but I will probably be the only one here that will give a thumbs down to this. In the Declaration of Independence, in one of the first 3 paragraphs, granted at that time and age, men was the term that they used for everything. So it says that all men are created equal in the eyes of the law. I have been against the hate crimes legislations from the beginning. All that did was set up a special class of crime that now a punishment is more. No, murder is murder, assault is assault, battery is battery, speeding is speeding, whatever you want to call it. Crime is crime, and if all men, persons, people, whatever term you want to use, but if we are all equal, the crimes and the punishments should be equal across the board. We have seen that the hate crimes in some of our larger cities have not helped with the murders and the attacks on religious people and on Asian people and on the elderly. Those are still continuing. They are not slowing down because of those actions. To me, part of this is nothing more than becoming more divisive, than more coalescing of people. And I believe everything that you have said about we all need to have respect, I totally agree with that. And that's part of this, is that I don't think you can legislate respect, okay? People get respect based on their attitude towards other people and how they treat other people. And that's where respect comes from. In the military, yeah, you had to respect the higher ranking officer. Didn't mean you really respected him as a person. You were respecting the rank. And we need to get past that as well, to where we respect the people. And we need to respect all people. The other thing that concerns me is, and you brought it up just now, that everybody else is doing it. Just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean that we have to do it. I remember back when we passed the resolution that basically a survey was read where we ranked low because we didn't have an ordinance, because we didn't have X number of LGBTQ, and this was put out by that community, that we didn't have that many people on our city staff. I mean, it seems like we're trying to play to a survey, and the people that are really interested in coming to our community should look at the way our community handles and respects their people. Back in the 90s, we had an LGBTQ council member and mayor of the city clear back in the 90s. We are now in that same situation. And you mentioned the short, fat kid being bullied. That was me. I was 5'4" and weighed 170 pounds. I was the fat kid that got bullied all the time. So no, I have been there. The thing of it is social media has made it just that much worse. When somebody was bullying me, I could stand up and pop them in the face when I'd finally had enough of it. Today, with the social media, I can't do that. It's coming from everywhere, and it's just dogpile on whoever. So I understand your concerns. I appreciate them. I appreciate the time you folks put into it, and you particularly, John. I know this was from when we did the ordinance for the massage licensing. Those are very time consuming to get through those types of things. So I do appreciate everybody's time here, but unfortunately, I think this is putting something on the books that will be hard to enforce and really doesn't accomplish the goals that you're trying to accomplish. Thank you. Yeah.
And I'll get Kyle.
Okay, so I'm going to disagree with you. It's, you have not been in a position to where you were a female and got sexually harassed and told you had to do certain favors to keep your job. You were not a person of color or of anything else to where a job was threatened just because of the way you look. That has never happened to you. Wyoming, in a whole, is still the good old boys club. Has been for years, and that needs to change. Is this gonna stop everything? Absolutely not. Have we needed something with teeth? Absolutely. We've needed it for a very long time. The Anita Hill situation with Clarence Thomas was the beginning of it. But it's only highlighted the problem. Wyoming, we still deal with it every single day. We women and people in the LGBT community and people of color deal with this daily, multiple times a day. And so this is us telling the world this is not acceptable, that it is not okay to treat people. If I show up to a job and I'm capable of doing the job, that's all that they need to know. They don't need to know anything else about me. Nor should I have my pay reduced just because I'm a woman or be treated something different. I should be able to go in and do my job without having to be sexually harassed or have my job threatened. So you have not had to live in that situation. Until you do, you can't say that this is a bad thing. This is us just letting the world know this behavior is wrong, period.
Kyle. I'll get you, Steve.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate the conversation. I think it allows an opportunity for exercises and thought. I just wanted to address the point you made, Steve, about murder is murder. We should treat a crime as a crime. Our criminal justice system already makes a distinction between murder, first degree, second degree, third degree. There's different factors that enhance the penalties for those crimes based on primarily the motives of the person, whether it was predetermined. A lot of it is intangible, based on the person's thoughts at the time. And so I feel like that distinction's already made, and I feel like most people accept that there should be enhanced penalties for crime, murder that was premeditated. I'm not a legal expert, that's the only one that comes to mind. But just wanted to point out that we already make that distinction in law, and so the reason I've been okay with enhanced penalties for crimes committed against a person based on nothing but their personal characteristics is a comment that Councilwoman Pollack-Amber made last year when this came up, and that was that a crime against a person based on those characteristics is not just a crime against one person, it's a crime against a community of people. Those crimes that are being committed aren't based on, a lot of the time you don't even have to know that other person. It creates this lack of safety, or this feeling that you have to be looking over your shoulder because somebody could arbitrarily murder you based on nothing but the color of your skin or the way that you present yourself. And so that's why I personally have been okay with moving forward on this ordinance, because I don't think it's a crime against necessarily just one person. And I already think our criminal justice system distinguishes different levels of crime based on people's thoughts at the time. So that's why I've been more comfortable with it.
So Steve, I got Jai, and then I'll get you. Jai.
Thanks. I actually don't have a lot to add. I think Lisa and Kyle,
Oh, you hit mute?
You hit the button though.
Hold on, Jai. Wait a second.
Way to go, Carter.
Yeah.
Apparently Carter didn't want to hear from you.
He was trying to move you.
But we do.
Yeah, one of these.
Go ahead, Jai.
Did you hear me at all?
No.
Yeah, no, got to start over, sorry.
No. It's okay. I'll be quick. I was going to say very similar things to Lisa and Kyle, so thank you for making those points really eloquently. I think it also just matters to have ways to identify trends in our community, and I think this gives us another tool to understand what's happening and to help protect people who are more vulnerable. And I think the evidence shows that there's more vulnerability towards those who are protected in these groups in this ordinance. So I'm 100% behind it, and also just want to extend my thanks to everybody who's put a lot of work and thoughtfulness into it. So that's it for me.
Steve.
Just as an added point is that, no, you're right, I haven't been a woman. But because of the clothes I have worn, I have been called a baby killer, spit on, told to stay the hell out of the places. So yeah, I've been down some of those roads. But that was because I was willing to sign up and willing to sacrifice my life if that came to that for this country when I was in the military. And when you came home from the war and when you were in the military in the late 60s and early 70s, you were spit on, you were cussed at, you were degraded, just like what you're talking about right now. And you dealt with it. But they didn't change the law. There was no civil penalties. And you went on. So yeah, I've been there.
Isn't it time though? Isn't it past time?
It's just what I said, is that you have to have respect. Just like I'm not up in your face about it the way you were in mine. You didn't need to do that. You could have sat there very calmly, as I am now, and spoke about it. But those are the things that I'm talking about, is that you have to respect, and you have to have the respect for another person's opinion.
Bruce, thank you. So I, for one, want to thank you for bringing that point to the table. I think that's what makes this council so absolutely special and such a good group to work with, is because we all have different views. And Steve, I've looked at it from every avenue, and you and I are a lot alike in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
And I really did. But, you know, for me, what this does is it's going to throw it right in the public eye. So it's going to make it prevalent. It's going to make it, we're talking about it now, and I think that really helps. And I can tell you, I have a friend in the LGBTQ community who, for whatever reason, people want to go by their house and create havoc and problems with them. So I actually gave that person a Ring doorbell that they could put on their house, with the agreement that the next time it happens, you call me, because I get to go deal with that person. Because I'm serious. I'm just sick and tired of it. There is no reason whatsoever to treat somebody different or be mean. And this deals a lot with physical assault. I mean, the first 3 or 4 or 5 paragraphs on there are all about physical assault. So I'm going to go up and physically attack somebody because they're different than me. I'm just, if this helps bring a light to it and get people to realize that it's not okay to be a bully and it's not okay to mistreat people. And you're right, we can't legislate respect. I absolutely agree with you. That's something that we'll never be able to do. But if we could start punishing those people that want to go around and be disrespectful and harm other people, then maybe we could find a way to make this stop. And I agree with you. It's about time that we start moving into a kinder, nicer way of being. So for me, just so you know, I had a lot of the thoughts you did too. I did. But there's just too much good in this, and too much, you know, the guy that really doesn't like this is sitting at home right now going, that I wish he'd shut up. That guy, he's the bully. He's the one that's doesn't want to be held accountable for mistreating people. And so bring it on. I'm all about it. So, but thank you. I mean that. I think it's important that people get to share their feelings respectfully, and so I appreciate you for doing that.
No. And I knew that I was probably going to be the only one here that didn't. So, yeah, again, you've got to stand up for where you are and what you believe.
Michael.
Thank you, Mayor. I myself am amazed that Wyoming doesn't have something on the books. I've been in several industries that we've trained on the federal laws on this. I know them backwards and forwards, and for a state to not stand up for these people just amazes me. So I'm thankful to everybody that's put in your ideas, your thoughts. I appreciate your thoughts on it, and everybody's thoughts on it. My wife is a minority. She's from another country. My son is gay. And I have seen personally a lot of attacks on my loved ones that appall me. I've never liked bullies. That's the one thing in the world I cannot stand is a bully. And I think if this will calm down some of the bullies, that we'll see that there's more to it than just a slap on their wrist for what they're doing. I'm all for it.
Thanks, Michael.
Just one more comment. This goes, like Lisa said, this goes way further than the LGBTQ community as well. You have to remember, I have my doctorate in divinity. I'm a very religious, God-fearing man. I get a lot of shit on social media, especially for being religious. So can I say shit?
That's what I just asked. I was just double checking.
First off, I apologize. But secondly, remember, we do have the First Amendment, and I think I could say that if I need to. So I do apologize for that. But I'm not trying to put myself on any level of somebody who's being attacked, because I'm big enough to protect myself in most cases. But religious persecution is just as difficult, especially in this town. And so, you know, this covers the whole plethora. So I like it. I'm done.
Thank you.
You're shitting welcome, sir.
So I guess I'll just wrap it up. I think the work and the effort and the time that was in it, whenever you talk about these types of things, I know because I was part of the resolution discussion and passing, was highly charged. It has a lot of emotion behind it. It's not easy to have those conversations, but they have emotions behind that. And I think the conversation to have, there's a lot of passion behind feelings that they have, especially if you're in a group that can have discriminatory practices against you. And it's unfortunate, it's real, it's in our society, and we have to deal with it. So our hope is that we can do that. And when we talk about whether it was the military, people coming back from Vietnam was abhorrent, how people were treated, just as people in, if you're a female, if you're in the LGBTQ community, whatever that is, our hope is that we're called to treat people with dignity and respect. It just doesn't happen, obviously, and we can't legislate. I agree, we can't legislate it. But what we can say is we have a higher standard in our community, that we treat all people, whoever you are. If you're Catholic, if you're Buddhist, if you're female, whoever you are, that we're calling upon our community to stand higher. And there will be people that will dissent and say their things, however that may be. But to me, there is no greater calling as a government official that we stand to protect our community. There's no greater job than for us as people. We can pass all these pointless ordinances, but if we pass an ordinance that protects human beings, that is one of the greatest callings that you can have as a government official, frankly. So it's an honor to go through this process. I know Mayor Collins felt that way in Cheyenne as one of the biggest legislations that he felt he ever passed. And I feel the same way, that we have an opportunity to make a statement how we feel. I don't think it is a coincidence. Tomorrow is the day that Matt Shepard passed away in 1998, and so I don't think that's a coincidence as we move forward with this. And so I guess I would just ask for a thumbs up to move forward with this to go to the floor. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I was going to do a break now.
I'm so hungry.
Let's take a break.
You just ate half the cookies.
Come on, man.
Fleur,
You put them in front of me.
Is it out there? Okay.
Fleur?
No, thanks for putting it together.
So dinner is out in the chambers. I think it's kind of like buffet style. So please go grab something, and we'll come on back here, grab something to drink, be able to do that.
Is the whiskey out there?
Hi, Mary.
Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Carter Matthews.
I just wanted to ask you, do you write down like the quotes for the thumbs up, thumbs down?
Part of the
like
advisory
feedback?
council monitoring?
Yes. Or something like this?
The thumbs up in here is really just a collective sort of directive
Okay.
to take it to the next level. This is not the
You know what?
Bruce, he
Yes.
was dying to get a cookie.
Well, tell him to stay still. Thank you.
All right, Carter, grab me another fork because I broke mine.
All right, Pete's history, I'm coming all the way around.
You got a spoon?
Carter. Oh, thank you, though, Steve.
Well, that's the one I want.
Well, now you have to take two. Sure. Use another one.
All right, Carter, go ahead and get us started with the contractor licensing category updates.
You betcha. You betcha. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have Liz and her team here this evening to kind of help us through these next three items, the first of which is the contractor license category updates. This particular item is actually a little bit of a follow-up to a request from some of you when in conjunction with a previous item, the question was brought up whether or not we should have some sort of licensing with respect to what people typically call a handyman sort of business or work that is rendered throughout the community. This level of repair and maintenance will be one of the topics that Dan will help us through tonight as far as an update proposal. And he has another suggestion as well that he worked with the Licensing and Appeals Board to provide some feedback on. So without further ado, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn some time over to Mr. Elston.
Great.
That'd be great.
Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Bear, City Council, for giving me this time to present this to you. As mentioned by Mr. Napier, we with the Contractors Licensing Board have reviewed the current licensing categories. There's three licenses. There's a Class 1, a Class 2, and a Class 3. And with that, there's a large gap between the Class 3 and the Class 2. If in your memo was defined in there that on a Class 3 you are allowed to do work up to 25% of the value of a single-family residence. Excuse me. A Class 2, you're allowed to do work up to 12,000 square feet of a commercial building. That gap is very large, and we have applicants that come in requesting a Class 2 license so that they can build a single-family home. And they really don't have the experience for the commercial application that a Class 2 license affords. So what we have proposed is to create a Class 2B license, which would allow somebody from a Class 3 to be able to apply for a Class 2B license, which would allow you to do a single-family residence and up to a 4-unit apartment building. In that, it will give them some commercial experience, plus also anything 3-story and above or 3 units and above requires fire protection, which would introduce them also to them requirements also. In that gap, that would alleviate the problem of somebody not really having that experience for a Class 2 license to apply for it because they want to build a single family home. They're not interested in the 12,000 square foot commercial building, but they do have that ability to do that with that license. So that is the purpose of the Class 2B license. The Class 4 license, as Mr. Napier mentioned, it would be, as we would kind of call it, a handyman or a handy person license, is for, we have a lot of those people out there that are performing that type of work, maintenance and repair work on homes, and it's not permitted, licensed, or inspected. And they do not have the ability to attain a Class 3 license. So with that lesser experience, if we had a Class 4 license, that would give them, in your packet, it showed the requirements of what they would be allowed to do, which is minimal in a home. But in that, with it being permitted and them being licensed and getting the inspection, there's some safety things that can really be averted by doing this. So that would be the purpose of the Class 4 license, plus that also puts them in with the ability to later on, if they wanted to get a Class 3 license and move up the ladder, they have documented experience with what they've done so far. So I've had numerous calls from people requesting that type of a license because they do not have the experience or the ability required for a Class 3 license. So that is the crux of the memo.
Any questions for Dan? Kyle?
Thanks, Ray. And thanks, Dan, for the information. I've never worked I worked for Pope Construction for one summer, but they mostly just made me work the wheelbarrow, so very naive to how most of this works.
Sure.
This all sounds good to me. It sounds like there's gaps that we should fill. I think I have a two-part question. One is, for Class 4, the folks that are doing that level of work, do you foresee a great deal of buy-in from that demographic of people to, actually request the permits and get licensed to that sort of work? Do you see the incentive there on their part, or I guess that's the first part of my question. Do you see a lot of buy-in from the folks doing that level of work to request those permits and get licensed for that kind of work?
I do see a lot of buy-in for that because they don't have that ability to do it. That's why they don't. But to make a living, they still do the work because they need. That's how they make their living or whatever. So they would really afford that avenue. I think it would be a great buy-in for them.
Okay.
I have not heard from anybody that would be negative against this license that do that type of work.
Thank you. I think from a marketing perspective, it would obviously, if somebody could say, I'm licensed and, abiding by all the permitting rules and everything, doing that, I think that could obviously help them just from a marketing perspective. But again, don't engage with these folks that much. My other question was, what does that look like, the financial impact to like your department that is doing the inspections for somebody doing the Class 4 type stuff, just doing some drywall or something like that? What sort of impact, if any, does that have on your department to do those sorts of inspections on that lower
Lower tier? It would not have any impact that we could not handle with the current staff that we have. And even though it may seem like a small inspection, there can be something that can be a safety concern if somebody installed a water heater wrong. Actually, you're creating a bomb with that water heater. It's not installed correctly. So there's the minor things that can get overlooked that this will help in those concerns also. But as far as impacting our current staff, we would be able to handle the added inspections and revenue that would come from this.
Thank you.
I got a couple people on in the queue, so I got Steve, Lisa, Amber, and somewhere I'm going to throw Carter in there. Steve.
I'm assuming as well that you're going to be requiring the insurance the same as you do for the other contractors.
Yes, I was going to mention that all licensed contractors are required to have a current certificate of insurance on file with the city of Casper.
So to a point, this actually helps out the homeowner or the person hiring the contractor as well. If they bother to ask them if they've got the license, then that shows that they also have the insurance, which there's a lot of them that probably don't along those lines, I would assume.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Lisa.
So I do have experience with handymen, and this is just more of a commentary. It's so anybody can be a handyman right now. Anybody. You can walk up and say you know how to install windows and doors and things like that, and literally everybody does that. And then they advertise that they can do all of these things without they don't know the city code, so they're not clear on what plumbers can do, what plumbers are supposed to do versus the electrical, because there is a clear division on what we have to have for plumbers versus the electricians versus your contractor. So we have these guys that come in and say, well, I've changed out my water heater, I could do that, but reality is that should be more of a plumber. So the thought process is that we have a lot of handymen that just kind of take money and run, and then they don't do the job, and then it costs homeowners a lot of money. So this is to protect the general public. So if we got them a license, then there's a little bit of oversight. So if somebody did their due diligence and asked these handymen to have a license, then with luck that would weed out some of the other guys that aren't serious about it. And so it's just truly people who are in the business and they want to do professional work.
Amber.
Steve covered what I was gonna say.
Okay. Carter, do you want to jump in?
I
real
think
quick?
I'm good too.
You good?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Bruce?
Thank you. Is there teeth in that as far as if somebody's operating without the license and now that a handyman one will be available? In other words, if somebody hires a handyman and they call the city to make sure they're licensed and you find out they're operating without one, does this somehow give you some teeth to deal with that situation, or?
We are looking at violations and penalties at a later date. Depending upon this, if they don't have a license, I don't have teeth to do anything. If they do have a license, I do have the ability to suspend or revoke that license because of that.
Well, I'm of the opinion that that should be in this, simply because it's all part of the same process. And once we license handymen, nobody should be doing work residentially or commercially in the city of Casper without a license. So to me, if that's the case, then it should have the teeth in it right now before it comes to the floor.
That is in the ordinance that they are not to do that work without a license. If we pass this license, I mean, anybody that does the work that's required for a class 1, 2, or 3 license is required to get the permits and have a license for that work. That's not to say that doesn't happen, but if they don't have a license, I do not have the ability as the building official to suspend a license they don't have or to revoke it or to do something in that case.
I'm more, I guess, worried, if I may, I'm more worried about the handyman situation, simply because when I was on the contractor licensing board, how many times did we hear about people getting hoodwinked, people not doing the proper work or taking the money and running? And so this should literally not allow anybody to do any work within the city now without some form of license, whether it's a class 4 or a 2B or whatever it is. So to me, it seems like the teeth should be in it now instead of later, because, I mean, what do you think, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think that that's probably not a bad proposal. At least it puts the potential applicant on notice right away that that would be an issue to be aware of. So.
I'd say, and my point is, instead of getting the cart ahead of the horse, we just put the cart and the horse in shop right now and just do it all at once. It's kind of my thought, because what's going to happen is you're going to have to come back to us with a penalty phase or whatever, and so I think it should just all be wrapped up in one and done.
Kyle.
Thanks, Rick. Again, very naive, so just trying to further inform myself. The majority of handyman level work that's being done in the city right now, is that work being done by handymen, or do you see folks with class 1 licenses also doing the drywall repair and other stuff, or is it typically there's enough business for them to do that they're sticking to the class 1 type work?
The people that have their license, they respect their license, and they will pull their permits and get their inspections to protect that license. So no, you typically do not have licensed contractors going out and doing unpermitted work.
And I may have asked that incorrectly. One of the thoughts I'm having is I imagine most people seek out handymen to do some of these tasks because they're on a budget. Maybe that's why they're hiring unlicensed people and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, does the implementation of this license, do you foresee that leading to rate increases among the majority of people that are doing handyman level work to cover the cost of permitting and licensure? And will people still have a financial incentive to hire people that are doing unlicensed, unpermitted work just because they don't have the money to be able to afford somebody?
The cost of our permits, according to our fee schedule, are pretty minimal. A typical permit is going to be $70 for $1,000 worth of work. And as you go up higher with the value of work, the less that percentage comes. After you get up to a certain amount, our permit fees are typically around 1%. So for somebody to jeopardize their license for 1% of the value of their work, they're going the 99%. I know that there's materials, labor, and costs and stuff in that, but that is I cannot say whether there are people that will try and circumvent that. I'm sure that there may be, but the fee costs would not dramatically rise the cost of construction at all.
Thank you. Carter, and then I'll get Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To be clear, I would remind you that for a Class 4 license holder, those are generally going to be folks who are repair and maintenance type contractors, for lack of a better word. They aren't going to be in the construction field or whatever. They're going to be in the replacement field, so to speak. And so permits don't always apply in a lot of that level of work. And so from that standpoint, as far as the consumer is concerned, there wouldn't be a lot of difference.
Thank you.
Bruce? I want to be very clear about my suggestion to put the teeth in it as well. This isn't about trying to generate funds for the city. It's not about anything like that. This is about trying to protect the consumer, our constituents. This is about making sure the people that are doing the work are qualified, and if they're licensed, they're generally have passed some type of an aptitude test, I'm assuming, even on the Class 4 level?
Yes.
So this just gives a layer of protection for the average consumer to make sure that the work is being done by someone with some aptitude. And that's what it's about. It's not about money for me, it's about accountability.
So everybody want to keep that in mind, because I'll get Steve next, but Bruce's suggestion, we'll have to have a thumbs up to put that in if everybody's okay with that. So keep that in mind and go to Steve.
I was going to say, most of the things that you're talking about here, excuse me, with the Class 4 is, you know, the deck repairs, the retaining walls, fences, those things technically right now all require permits. So, go ahead.
Oh, it depends on the extent of the work involved with those.
Okay.
Too. So,
But
a retaining wall under 48 inches does not require a permit. but if you were to pull that permit, even though it may not be required, so you can tell your homeowner or the person you're doing the work for, I'm getting a permit and getting this inspected.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that assures the homeowner that they're getting a quality project also.
Well, not only that, but also, like in your business, where you're selling, reselling, whatever, homes and things, it protects the next buyer from the property as well. So from that standpoint, but yeah, that's what I was getting at too, though, is a lot of these things that the Class 4 guy is doing would require a permit, depending on, you know, if you're going to go out and replace 200 foot of fence, you're going to have to go get a permit for it. So, you know, that's something that nowadays most people wouldn't go do, but that's required nowadays. So I think it's a good deal all the way around. Absolutely.
So if there's not any other questions for Dan or comments or anything, to the Vice Mayor's point, to put that in there, to kind of put the teeth, is everybody okay with that? Do you want more of an explanation?
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
Carter, do you see any implications of doing that in terms of, I mean, is that gonna hold up this process? Like, is there a reason not to do that all in one fell swoop that you can see?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I don't think so. I think if indeed you're comfortable with some brief language in there notifying the people impacted, it should not slow us up or cause any additional burden.
Good question. Okay, we'll move forward with that.
As a follow-up to a question, what's the testing fee nowadays to get a permit, to get a license?
The city of Casper does not charge a fee.
We
encourage people to be licensed, so we do it free of cost. They can go get an ICC certification, which there is a testing site in town, International Code Council, and they do charge for that. With the ICC certification, I encourage them to do so, because that goes beyond our jurisdiction. If they take our test for the city of Casper, that is only allowed for work in the city of Casper,
Within the
in our
city limits,
jurisdiction. And then we reciprocate with the Natrona County also.
So you don't charge to test, but you do charge a licensing
Yes.
fee. And what is that?
It's $150.
That's,
For a
and the
class four.
renewal is 75?
75, I believe.
I was thinking, yeah,
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to remember back when I had one,
Yeah.
so that's why I was asking.
Yeah.
But still, when you look at the amount of work that's being done, these costs for the license and for the renewals are not
Very minimal.
exactly. The bigger fee may be for the liability insurance, which I don't even remember what that's.
$300 a
these
year,
days.
depending on.
Is that what it is
level of work,
nowadays?
yeah.
Okay, very good. So, just to pass on to the public and to the people who are asking about whether it does increase costs or not, it's, yeah. So,
Bruce?
Thank you. Will there be a different test then that you have developed for the lower level license?
I will create a test for the class 4 license, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, I just want to make sure you're good. I keep kind of forgetting about you. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so with the suggestion from Bruce, we're good to go. Okay.
All right, we'll have it ready.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Nick.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, demolition safety barriers, Carter.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is a question with regard to comments and issues, if you will, that members of the public have brought up to us over the years as it relates to sites that are engaged in demolishing a structure. A real good, timely example that all of you probably remember is when the commissary mall was coming down. That was a very significant demolition. It took a number of days, in fact, maybe even weeks to bring down completely. And you'll notice that people were coming and going off that site relatively freely that weren't a part of the project. And the concern that we had from a staff perspective was, should there be some level of protection or barrier with regard to those kinds of sites where oftentimes holes are involved or overhead threats are involved with respect to the portions of the building still standing and so on. The proposal for you tonight suggests that a barrier be erected around demolition sites and not just open holes or trenches should this ordinance pass. And so we wanted to give you an opportunity to hear the dialogue from Liz's department, give you the chance to ask questions about these kinds of things in preparation for a potential formal directive to bring an ordinance of this nature to the floor. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn the time over to Liz and Dan, I'd appreciate it.
Welcome back, Dan.
Didn't have time to
We missed you.
Long time no see.
Mr. Napier pretty well explained. The memo was very short. We do have a current ordinance that requires safety barriers around holes and trenches that are open for a certain amount of time. Talking of the commissary mall, I actually had to go and ask somebody to remove themselves from the park bench when one wall was standing while the excavator was tearing down the wall directly on the other side. And that, as the extended period of time and within the area of the city that it was, so the public was very able to just walk back and forth across that, even at night when the contractors are gone. And another thing with demolition projects that is different than a hole or a trench is there could be materials in there that people deem salvageable. If there's some copper wire or some copper pipe or some brass or something like that, even though it may have been removed, they don't know that. So they could very well go into an unsafe structure and put themselves at risk by doing so. So it would be probably, when you look at the cost of a safety barrier, there's levels of safety barriers that you would be able to install, depending upon the type of the demolition. If it's a house that's gonna take one day and they're there the total time and then it's removed, then the house is gone, you know, that probably would not require the same type of a safety barrier as you would on something like, as you remember, the state building before they started that demolition project. There were numerous structures that took an extended period of time and they put up the safety barrier prior, which was left for the construction of the building also, to keep the public out. So this is for the public safety that we are looking at, to include this requirement for safety barriers dependent upon the size of the project and the nearness to the public for their safety, for what may be required, for what type of safety barrier would be required. Questions?
Okay, Lisa and then Amber and Kyle.
Who pays for the barrier?
It would, at this time, it would have to be borne by the cost of the contractor that pulls the permit.
So in the permit, are we going to, sorry, Paul.
No, you're good.
Are we going to say it has to be 6 feet tall, or all the parameters of whatever that we pass?
That would be created in the ordinance for the type of barrier for the type of project and at the discretion of the person, the building official or the person that's authorized to issue the permit. Whether it need to be a construction fence, there's just a small barrier that's easy to put up. You look at the type of barriers like you have around the Nolan project, they're expensive. They are $2 per lineal foot for 3 months. And that's if you go get it, pick it up and install it. They'd have a $5 per lineal foot installation fee and takedown fee. So, and the minimum is 3 months on one of those. So you would not want that for a residential property that is only gonna take, I talked to the fencing company that I talked to this about, for their prices, I said, if it takes 3 days, they said, no, the price is still for 3 months. So that's what you pay for. So that's why we would need to look at the project specifically and see what kind of safety hazards there are for the public and determine what type of safety barrier should be allowed for that.
Amber.
Thanks. I think this is really common sense, so long as we create appropriate tiers so that we aren't requiring people to go way overboard on fencing and the associated expenses for, you know, depending on their project. But the house across the street from me was taken down not too long ago, and I think I called somebody. I think I called Carter and said, do we have something? It felt very unsafe to me. It was just a couple days, but I mean, it was a very active construction site. The sidewalk was open. There were people walking their dogs while there was like a fridge like hoisted in the air on a crane, and I was like, this doesn't seem correct. It really feels like this should be partitioned off somehow, and you know, the sidewalk should be closed or whatever needs to happen so that there aren't people roaming around. And it was an overnight you know, situation in a neighborhood where people could have free access to the half demolished lot through the night, and it seemed really weird to me. So I think this makes perfect sense, you know, so long as what we ask of people is reasonable in terms of what we want them to construct.
Kyle and then Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a bit of a two-parter. Again, very naive about a lot of this. Let's take, since we've used the example of the commissary mall, would you be able to give a ballpark figure of just the 3-foot orange construction fence around that whole thing? What is the cost of something like that?
I was not able to get that cost in preparation for this.
No worries.
I apologize for that, but it would be minimal compared to the actual barrier that I spoke of. I would imagine it would probably be, if I had to ballpark it, probably a couple $100.
Okay.
Not to purchase it and then to drive in some T-posts.
Not prohibitive enough that they would have.
That is reusable on multiple sites. It wouldn't be disposed of. It would be a sunk cost. Yes.
Yeah, I guess that would be my only hesitation. I'd want to make sure that whatever associated costs with an ordinance that we develop aren't so prohibitive that in an example like that, they would have chose not to demolish it because it added to the cost. I think we're better off with them having demolished that lot, and you know, it'll probably help them offloading it to someone else. My hesitation stems from, I totally agree that if they're in the public right-of-way, over a sidewalk, over a street, we need to have something in place to keep folks from being in a part of that. But on the flip side, I also, I heard the words personal responsibility many times growing up, and so
Right.
I guess I don't have much sympathy for somebody if they're going to trespass onto private property to steal some copper and they get hurt because it's an unsafe site. I guess, my sympathy is not much in situations like that. You could make the argument that we have lots of vacant buildings in the city, and I imagine a lot of those are potentially unsafe structures, and we don't require those folks to do any sort of mitigation as far as keeping folks out of there. So I guess that's why I'm a little torn on this. When they're in the public right of way, I think that makes absolute sense. When they're not, probably shouldn't be on private property.
Councilman, we do have, if a building is abandoned and open, it's deemed an unsafe structure, and we do, through my department and code enforcement, we do identify those and make them safe by securing them.
Oh, okay, good to know. Thank you.
Jai.
Thank you. I guess just a quick question. I feel like the hypotheticals here seem very obvious, and I agree that this makes a lot of sense, but I'm just curious if we have examples of people being injured or of property being stolen that would add some urgency to this issue.
Councilwoman Jai, I do not have any records of injury or things that were stolen. I do not know if that records would be able to be kept, because the demolition contractor has large machinery and his job is to remove it as quick as possible, because time is money. I do not think he would take an inventory to see from night to morning if anything was removed from the property. He'd probably think it was saving him money because somebody picked something out of it. He didn't have to.
Thanks. I think just as a quick follow-up, I'm just really in agreement that I would just want to make sure that this is, if we proceed on this, that it's in alignment with our lived experience, and that we're not creating unnecessary or no pun intended barriers for people to do the work that they need to get done. So,
Bruce.
Good one, Jai. I like the pun. I'm assuming when you're asking for direction, so I'm assuming when the ordinance comes, they'll have the dynamics of what type of barriers for what type of situations, so that a contractor bidding work knows to add. Okay, that's what I was assuming. And also, Kyle, I grew up in the personal responsibility era as well, but that doesn't help when it comes to kids, dogs, I think it's okay to err on the side of caution and on the side of safety, personally. But if we don't want to over-ordinance things, I'm also certainly okay with that as well.
Steve.
As a very brief follow-up, you shouldn't be worried about the dogs, because the dogs ought to have a competent person on the other end of the leash when they're out and loaded.
Sometimes my dog gets away, Steve. You haven't met my dog yet. He's a shit. Oops. That's my word tonight, I guess.
That's the word of the night.
Oh, sorry, folks.
I just couldn't resist that.
Any other questions for Dan or Steve? So, Carl, you just need direction for us to move forward with this?
If that's council's desire, please.
Council comfortable with moving forward?
Okay, it's a good idea.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Dan. I don't think we're going to see you for the aquatic subsidy, are we?
You're going to see me again.
So I hope you change your tie.
He's welcome.
He's welcome to do the presentation. Did you hear that, Dan?
No, I did not.
You don't want to hear it.
So Lima said you could give the presentation for the aquatic subsidy if you'd like.
It might be short.
By all means, then.
Step right up.
Shipping container ordinance, Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a question that we are getting a lot of feedback on here lately from the public as it relates to the use of shipping containers, contiguous sometimes and not all the time, with respect to building projects in the context of potentially being permanent with regard to a multiple and variety of uses anymore. Many of you are familiar with the notion of containers being stashed on properties for storage, particularly in the form of construction and so on. But we're also morphing into the use of shipping containers for longer term storage, for multiple containers being used on the same property, and in a lot of cases, as you are all aware, with regard to becoming actually places of business. And so sea cans, as many of you probably have heard them referred to, are taking a larger role in our community. Unfortunately, our ordinances are ambiguous in many areas as it relates to proposed uses that members of our public are coming up with. And so in those areas of ambiguity, we're hoping that you can provide us some clarity with respect to proposals that we would offer you to consider to hopefully shore up a lot of that ambiguity and remove the lack of clarity, as it were. So, with that in mind, we've got some ideas, we've got some questions we want to pose. And for that, I'd like to turn the time over to Mr. Collins and, oh, it's Mr. Elston. Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Elston.
Well, same tie Dan, huh?
Thank you.
Nice tie.
That's a nice
I feel like
tie.
I made it Final Jeopardy here. But anyhow, as Mr. Napier had mentioned, the current ordinances that we have do not really specifically identify sea can storage. And in that, we had to make a list of requirements that we give to people for sea can storage. That had to be taken out of the codes and the ordinances that were very vague on what the requirements were for storage. And they don't identify sea cans. Now, what we need to do is be more specific because of the more popular use now of sea cans for storage. And in that, the International Code Council from 2018 to 2021 created a section in the codes for, instead of calling them sea cans, they call them intermodal shipping containers, is what they're called. And there were codes created in there for that because there was at one time, in my personal opinion, kind of a fad that, well, maybe we can use these to build houses and commercial buildings. That did not happen as much as you would think. I think I found one instance in California where there was an architect that made one on the side of a mountain. But a lot of it was done in other countries. People often mistake modular construction as shipping containers. Many people will say, well, Starbucks was made out of shipping containers. It was not. It was modular construction. If you look at the size of it, a shipping container doesn't have the height and the width that's required for the rooms to apply all the plumbing, ventilation, and lighting that's required for a habitable structure. So by the time you revise that, it would be null and void to use one, wouldn't be feasible. So that is what in the residential code and the building code, they put intermodal shipping containers must meet all the requirements for their intended use throughout the code. So that means if you're going to use it to add an addition to your house, you've got to apply the heating, the ventilation, all those things to it. So they're not really popular in that respect. The other thing is the storage. We're using them for storage. So we would entertain some way to specifically identify the amount of shipping containers that you use for storage. We do have buildings that right now you can get a temporary permit for a shipping container for 6 months. With that, you do not have to put a pad underneath it. To make it permanent, you need to put a pad underneath it, as a foundation, to use it permanently. But in that really doesn't create a good aesthetic view for where they're used. Right now, we do not use them in residential areas because we're able to vertical metal siding is not allowed in residential areas. So we use that to remove the need for the use of a shipping container. For them to put it in there and then put lap siding on it would not be feasible. And to match the pitch of the roof and those things. But anyhow, if we could create an ordinance, this is the direction that we're requesting, that specifically applies to shipping containers and how many you may have. Because it's very easy for somebody with typical, say, a 3,000 square foot business, and they need more room. Well, we can move this out and put it in a shipping container, and we have more room here. Pretty soon there's 2 shipping containers. There's places that have 3 or 4, and they just multiply. And if we were to create this ordinance, that would only allow for a certain amount of storage versus with shipping containers compared to the size of your building, it would be very much easier for us to enforce in a way to where we do not have a yard full of shipping containers. I can tell you, if you drive down East Yellowstone and look at some of those businesses through there, there's actually one place where they have 2 shipping containers that they put side by side, and then a Quonset hut over the top, and they park their car underneath it. And it's you can see it from East Yellowstone, but it's not really appealing as far as when you drive by. So so that is the purpose that we would love to see, being able to create an ordinance specific to shipping containers and their use both in residential and commercial applications for either habitation or storage.
Okay, questions? Got Lisa first, then Steve.
A couple. So I hear about sheds and all this stuff all the time. Citizens constantly complain about how restrictive City of Casper is regarding our sheds, constantly. And so I believe the minimum shed size that somebody can put into their house is an 8x12 without requiring a concrete pad and all of those things.
The maximum that they can put in is 120 square feet.
Which is a 10 by 12?
10 by 12.
And so you have...
10 by 12 does require a permit, but anything smaller than that does not. But we still have to know where that is going to be located on the property.
Right, and so that's the whole thing, is that the town of Mills and Barnett and Evansville, it's easier to be able to put in a shed or drop one of these garages in place that they're selling with these shed guys have these garages or whatever that you can drop there, but the City of Casper prohibits that.
We do not permit it, prohibit it. It needs to be permitted and put in according to the ordinances.
Right.
For setbacks and those things, but they're not prohibited from being used.
So I just think that, like, if we were going to approve a C-can for, I don't know, it just seems like the same ordinance should apply for the garages as we do for the C-cans. So if we have to go through all of that for a garage, then somebody shouldn't be able to just drop a C-can in their yard as well. But I also understand the storage aspect of things. And then for the commercial, a lot of times that people steal so much off of the building sites that and the C-cans are a cheap storage option.
Yes.
You can pick them up for a couple $1,000s, and so it's really to secure their tools and lumber and things, so they're not having to haul stuff away and then bring it back every day and stuff. So I can understand the commercial use of C-cans for that purpose.
Yes, that was our intended purpose, is to store materials and transport it. And we do not require a permit for that. That's covered underneath their building permit or whatever, for if they are going to put C-cans on their site for that. So that doesn't require. And I do not believe we are requesting to put C-cans in residential areas. This is up to the discretion of the council on how you would want to apply C-cans in residential areas, but I don't think that was the intent of staff, that we allow them in residential areas.
Steve, Bruce, and Amber.
That was what I was going to ask, is you were talking about permitting for storage up to the 6 months. How do you do that on construction sites like, say the construction of the new high school? as long as that was construction and it was part of their building permit, they're good to have it there as long as they're building. Is
Yes.
that okay?
Yeah, the permit doesn't expire until the use is done.
Okay.
That is the same thing with the building permit, has a 6 month, and it expires. If you abandon the project for 6 months, then you need to reapply for a permit. But you take NCHS or Kelly Wallace, a project that goes, state building that goes multi-years, as long as it's continuing, it does not
Okay.
expire.
And I'm assuming that's the same for remodels on
Yes.
buildings and things.
That's the same for any work. As long as it's
Okay.
not abandoned and work progresses, it does not expire.
Bruce. Thank you. A couple questions. One's a comment. They built a new restaurant in Gillette out of sea cans.
Okay?
I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
It's a sandwich shop. If you go up 59 to where it dead ends and turn left, it's down there on your left.
Okay.
It's quite attractive. They put about 15 of them things together, and it looks kind of cool. And then when you go inside, it's pretty neat. But what happens? I have two more. What happens if we pass this to those people that already have their sea cans and their Quonset hut on it?
I do not know if I can answer that.
Carter?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, chances are that particular use is not a permitted use to begin with.
Right?
And so it's probably an illicit issue as it is right now.
Okay.
And
And
so,
I was thinking the same
Yeah.
thing, but I didn't want to be presumptuous.
no, that's okay.
Okay.
That's okay. I think it's a good question.
And then lastly, I think as a council, I think we do need to put some parameters on this. I think about my neighborhood that I live in, and it's an older neighborhood, but it's aesthetically pleasing. The last thing I would want is for one of my neighbors to move a sea can into my neighborhood to where I have to look at it.
Absolutely.
So if it's not appropriately sided, appropriately roofed, where you don't even know it's a sea can, I don't think it has any business being there. Now, is it fair for us to tell somebody on their piece of property what they get to do? I think it is when it comes to things like that, because we have ordinances now that don't allow people to stack a bunch of junk cars in their yard. So these sea cans they're not sightly by any means, and I don't think they belong in a residential area whatsoever, unless they're on a construction site where a house is being built or whatever, and it falls within their permit guidelines. But to be used as storage in a residential area, I would be vehemently opposed.
We currently use the codes and the ordinances that require the lap siding and the pitched roof. Even though it doesn't specify C-CAN, it specifies for storage accessory units, that's what they have to have. And that negates the feasibility of buying a C-CAN and then totally enclosing it to where it's not a C-CAN.
Well, if I did read this right, one of the questions we were asked as a council is how we wanted to proceed as far as residential as well. That's why I wanted to
Yes.
make that comment, because I don't think anybody wants them in their neighborhood.
Amber?
Thank you. So based on the memo, it's pretty clear to me that we do need to address this somehow. It also seems like there's quite a lot to it, probably a number of layers to it. One that's coming to mind right now, I mean, you're speaking about residential, and then in here it has commercial, industrial sort of grouped together, but I don't see those as similarly situated in this circumstance necessarily. My business is in a different jurisdiction, so, and we have C-CANs, so nobody can come ticket me for them because it's not here. But regardless, they are not the ugliest thing in the neighborhood, right? Like they are because we're in an industrial area, they hardly register on the scale of what is most unsightly in the area, and they are very useful to us. Like, you know, we as a small business right now with supply chain issues, like we're having to order tons of stuff that we wouldn't normally keep that much of on hand, but because of the inconsistencies with our ability to secure different things that we need, we've had to order up on all sorts of things, and so they are a helpful tool for us in that regard. And where they're at, I don't think nobody's out where I'm at for a scenic drive, so I don't think they're harmful in any way out there, and I do think they can be useful. So I think we should I think we should be careful to distinguish when it comes to places that are zoned for heavy industrial. Like I think go for it, and I don't really see the need to put too much restriction on it. And I think, you know, the closer you get to residential, the more we need to concern ourselves with aesthetics. So I think we can, you know, we can start to dial it back from there. But you know, I'd certainly like to see us take into account the different types of commercial areas that we do have within this city when we put something together. And you know, and there are differences in CCANs. I mean, some look like they've been on a literal boat on the ocean, which they have, and then some look like they were, you know, fresh off the manufacturing line, and to me those are also a little bit, you know, apples to oranges. So I think there are some considerations too in terms of, you know, how non-aesthetic is the CCAN, and what types of things would we like to see for aesthetic reasons. So to me, we should deal with this. There are a lot of questions in this memo that I think are going to have a lot of possibly like tiers of answers based on use and area and all sorts of other factors. So I would suggest, you know, we should do this, but it feels like it could be quite a long process to get this one right.
So Carter, as we kind of move through this, and it sounds like we're kind of, oh, go ahead, Jai.
Thanks. Just one other layer to add to it. I know that CCANs have been considered for commercial purposes in areas where the land is harder to dig down into. So we may also just want to consider that in terms of some of our development opportunities over in the Amoco area and along the river there. So that's just another layer to take into consideration. It may be an option that some people want to explore there. And I'm not sure we would want to unnecessarily limit that.
Steve.
Something that we may consider along how we would want to do it is, well, similar to barbed wire. It's got to be above a certain height and only in certain zoning areas. I can't, even if I wanted to, I can't put up a 6-foot high barbed wire fence in my residential neighborhood because it's, what, an R1 or an R4. So that may be a way to start setting guidelines on where we would even allow them to begin with, is that you can't have them in R4s or R1s along those lines. So that's something that I would consider potentially as an initial guideline of how to try to regulate it, which with, you know, like Amber's business being in a C whatever, that could be a good possibility that's listed as one of the available options there. So.
Jai, I think Carter said he could respond to your comment.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, and actually Mr. Vice Mayor, the good news is, as it relates to C-can shipping containers being used in building type materials or applications, if you will, is that indeed if they meet the building code, a facility like the one you're describing in Gillette can happen here in Casper. And so the Amoco reuse area is a great example of that. Currently, the codes will allow for that, so long as they are built to the standards that the code anticipates. So we aren't going to bring forward a proposal that would alter that or change that. However, what I do think I'm hearing is that we've gotten some good feedback as it relates to some ideas to consider. If it's okay with council, we'll take these broad sorts of discussion points and bring you a draft that elucidates what some of the changes might be for you to consider.
Amber.
Thank you. One other thought that may be too sticky to get into or may be appropriate, I'm not sure, but you know, because for me this is where we could be talking about a very broad set of structures here. And so I wonder if it also would make sense to include some sort of application for exemption process that people could undertake if they do believe that whatever, that their CCAN is a special CCAN that can enhance an aesthetic in the area or provides a certain use and is not going to detract, that we may be able to consider some of those situations, because I do think that they exist.
Lisa.
So, this is what a lot of people in residential areas are doing. They're taking a CCAN, opening it up, and making like a she shed or a he shed or a bar or whatever else. And so it doesn't have a pitched roof, it doesn't have the siding or whatever else. But I do think that we should at least consider this as an option for people to be able to do, provided that it's got the proper setbacks and things like that. But people are absolutely trying to utilize those in multiple different ways. Pinterest has got all kinds of ideas.
But can't they side it and put a pitched roof on it, or? That one looked like it was sided.
No, it's painted.
That's log
Yeah,
siding.
that one's sided, this one's not. So, I mean, there's a lot of different uses, but, so that's your basic thing. And then they can build houses out of
Can
it.
city staff do some research on Pinterest, Carter?
We already do.
You've already got it
I'm
done
an
and done.
supporter.
Carter's got his page.
Well,
Yes, go ahead.
That's aesthetically pleasing to me.
Right.
But I think, like Amber, I think Amber's on the right track. I think that person should file for an exemption. Mr. Elston can go out and look at it, see what they've got going on, and decide that, yes, that's aesthetically pleasing, it'll work in the neighborhood, and boom, issue the permit. So I do think there should be some type of an exemption clause to give them an opportunity to have something like that. But if we don't do it that way, you're gonna have every Tom, Dick, and Harry putting in C-cans and cutting holes in the middle of it going, yep, looks good to me. You know, so if we're going to do that, I like the idea of an exemption that they can apply for, that go out and actually physically look at it and go, yes, that works, or no, that doesn't, or nope, you gotta side it and put a roof on it.
That could go to P&C. And then you have to have the public notice, so you then get the input from the neighbors around it.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
That's probably a great idea.
I'm good. Just my legs are asleep.
We stood you too long.
Yeah.
Three presentations.
Oh, that's fine.
So Carter, it sounds like what we can do then is we've given you enough information with some ideas and kind of go from there. And you guys can kind of put something together and bring it back to the council to look at.
Yes, sir, and I would certainly suggest that along the lines of an exemption or some sort of approach to the planning commission, the less subjectivity in those circumstances, the better.
Yeah,
and so have that kind of rolling around in your mind a little bit, and if you've got ideas, that's exactly why we're here, because we want to generate those ideas and have that thought process stimulated for when we come back to you. Okay. But yes, I think we're good to go.
We got enough to go.
Yep.
Okay. Any questions? Anything else? Amber?
Along the lines of the exemption, I mean, ideally I'd rather avoid the exemption process if possible, but that to me is going to take quite a bit of researching examples of what they look like, and we can be like, yes, you know it when you see it, right? Like that to me is like, I wouldn't care if my neighbor had that in the backyard. I'd be like, sweet, it looks cool. But you know, they're to me potentially very different things, and so like I don't know the best way to enumerate those differences in an ordinance, but if we can get there without the exemption process, all the better.
Go ahead.
Keep in mind though, that what Amber thinks is cool.
Is cool.
Well, in all fairness, it probably is. It probably is. But my point was, Joe Blow from Mississippi, who just came out of the woods, might think what he's got going is cool.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's not so cool. So I don't know how you I don't know how you tweak that. I think the way to do it, honestly, not to put more pressure on Dan's office, but I think the way we do that is by putting boots on the ground and doing it on a case-by-case basis. It's not like we have 100 people knocking on the door that want to put sea cans in their backyard and make a bar. So I don't know that his department would be overrun by having to do that. But I think, like you said, even though it needs to be somewhat subjective, I think boots on the ground and looking at it going, yeah, that works, or no, that doesn't, I think is kind of what would have to happen in a situation like that.
Sure. Steve.
Carter seems to defer to everybody else. I'm going to defer to Craig for a minute. But I believe with your experience on P&Z and from when I was liaison on P&Z, I remember people coming when they wanted to extend the height of garages and when they wanted to do various things like what we're talking about. They would come to P&Z to ask for an exemption, and then it was a public hearing. They had to post notices, I believe, had to notify the people within a 300-foot radius. This type of a thing was the process to get the exemptions. So am I on the right ballpark for exemptions?
You know, I would want to talk to the attorneys more. The exemptions typically require a hardship, which is often very difficult to prove. So a lot of times we would do it with a conditional use where we can impose conditions that said we need to do a steeper pitch or we need to open it up more or color it or whatever. So I'm thinking conditional use could work.
Okay.
And I think that they could probably function in that capacity fairly easily. I think they're used to doing that kind of thing.
Okay, and sounds like we were using the wrong terminology probably by exemption versus conditional use.
Well, and I like the idea of going to the P&Z because then they do all the legwork.
Yep.
And we as a council don't have to do that. Because we shouldn't be dealing with that kind of stuff on a daily basis.
And if I recall right, they have to notify all the property owners within.
Yeah, that's a two-edged sword. It's, of course, we want to hear input from the neighbors, but sometimes there's personal issues there that the planning commission has to sort that out too, and they're used to doing that.
Exactly, but that's within 300 feet, so you get the neighbors notified and everybody's aware.
Okay. Carter, you got enough to move forward?
I sure do.
Okay.
I think so, yeah.
What I learned from
Thank
that
you.
whole thing is Amber knows what's cool.
That's right. All right.
Well,
She's got it down.
in the ordinance. Whatever Amber thinks is cool.
We could do it like an Amber stamp.
Thanks, Dan.
On all ordinances.
Yeah, almost all.
I like
We're in
it.
good shape.
All right.
Liz, thank you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
Craig.
much.
Chief, where you going there, bud? We're not done yet.
I'll be right back.
Oh,
He'll be
okay,
back.
check.
No, he's
I might take a little bit.
I'm messing with it.
He's getting
No,
checking.
I know, I'm messing with it.
Okay, on to aquatic subsidy.
Oh, great. Sorry.
I said that out loud too.
You know I'm giving you a hard time.
Shouldn't that have been your word of the day with an on?
I was gonna say.
No offense, and I don't mean to be overly funny, but I think Dan fainted because she was trying to stick it on him, and he's like, I've had enough. That's just my thought. It's all you, sis.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is yet another installment of our subsidy conversations. And in this particular instance, we're talking about aquatics. Now, as you know, aquatics is not just the outdoor pools, it's the indoor pool facility over at the rec center. And also, as you know, that's a facility that operates year-round. I'm hopeful, however, that despite whichever recreational enterprise we're visiting about, that indeed you recognize that we hope that these kinds of conversations are not the last of this frame of dialogue. That indeed you would expect that we're going to come back to you and say, okay, now that we've dissected all this data, we've developed these models that are really helpful in shining the light on some of the more granular issues that each of these enterprises involve, that it would be important for us to come back to you and say, okay, now that we have this understanding, what next? And so as you're evaluating this information, talking about this data and consuming it and so forth, I hope that the next step will be, particularly for the continuing council, that your admonition to us will be, all right, we have all this new knowledge now, and I will tell you, this is a new dissection of all of these enterprises. We expect staff as council to come back and bring us proposals that are hard recommendations pertaining to what we think we've learned, what we've gained from you by way of feedback, and then we can take this analysis to the next level and actually implement something. Because to date, you know, much of this has been philosophic. And I'd like to take it beyond the philosophy level into an implementation level. And certainly when you're talking about aquatics, that tends to be fairly sensitive to a lot of our users around the community. Nonetheless, this, you know, despite that sensitivity, it doesn't make sense to me as your manager to put together this body of work with all of the enterprises and leave it at the level where we're at right now and not do anything further. So as a plug for council goals, again, for those of you who are continuing into the new council starting in January, please consider that staff is ready and willing to bring you recommendations that hopefully could be a part of the rubric you set as the new council for your directives thereafter. I think you'll find some interesting points that Zulema and her team are going to make tonight, but please keep in mind, and you'll hear me say this again when we get through the end of all of these iterations of discussion, to challenge this group to say, okay, now what next? And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could defer to Zulema and her team, that'd be great. Zulema.
Mayor, members of council, good evening. So we are here to talk about aquatics tonight, and certainly we just came off a presentation where we discussed aquatics as it related to the 1 cent 17 request that was made, and so it kind of shifted the lens of this discussion to align more with the previous discussions that we've had about other rec enterprises, to really focus more on the general fund subsidy and what we can do to reduce that element of our budget.
Okay, good presentation. Thank you.
Is it turned on?
It's fast.
And I even turned it off while we were all waiting so that it wouldn't kill the battery.
Hey, bring the cookies back.
I'll try from here.
Please.
Okay, so first we want to start with just a recap of fiscal year 2022. That's me. So we'll start over here. So of course our fiscal year does run July 1 to June 30th, which creates some interesting challenges for us in terms of splitting our summer seasons into 2 different fiscal years. So this might seem a little awkward, but that's why. So we actually start the fiscal year with the closure of our pools, generally is like the big event after July 1. And so here it's important to point out, so we really align with the school district very closely. We close pools the day before school starts, and we open pools the day after school ends for the season. And so just to make that point, also want to point out that we do stagger the closure of our swimming pools. They all open on the same day after school starts, but we have to stagger the closing because we lose a lot of our seasonal staff that are lifeguards and serve other purposes at our pools. Particularly this first part of August, a lot of the high schoolers are re-engaging in sports and athletics in the schools, and so they leave. And then the latter part of the month is usually our college-age students that are leaving the community to go back to college or preparing for their college. So that is the reason we end up closing pools kind of in a phased method, primarily staff. And then, so November 1st, all outdoor pools. That's our target date for winterization for the season. So sometimes it's a little before that, sometimes it's a little later than that, but that's really our target, because much beyond this, we're gonna get into freezing temperatures, which causes us a lot of maintenance issues. December 20th through the 31st, so that's just an annual, school is out for Christmas break, and so the Casper Family Aquatic Center has open swim hours extended during that period of time, so the kids can enjoy the break in a warm indoor pool atmosphere. February 1st, so February 1st of each year is where our summer hiring actually starts. Edwin and his team starts getting jobs posted, and we start that hiring process early so that we can secure staff in time for pool opening. April 25th to June 7th, it's a long process to get pools ready to open for the season for our outdoor pools. You know, we're charging everything up, finding leaks and things that may have broken over the winter, and we're replacing those and just getting everything ready. It's really a concerted effort by the aquatic staff as well as our buildings and structure staff to get these pools ready to open. May 31st to June 3rd is when our lifeguards are on site doing training that's necessary for the season. Again, June 7th, last day of school. June 8th, we open all the outdoor pools. And then just as a fun community event, the Community Recreation Foundation, which we partner very closely with, sponsors a family pool party at Mike Cedar every year. That's a free event open to the public. So that's kind of a recap of our schedule for the year. This is a more in-depth kind of summary of how we performed last fiscal year. So last fiscal year, you can see we did really well with annual passes, over 1,000 total passes. We have 3 types of passes. We sell annual passes, 6-month passes, and 3-month passes, which are usually for the summer season, the outdoor season. And those 3 types of passes saw over 30,000 visits. So definitely our pass holders are getting the value for the money that they pay for their passes. In addition to those 30,000 plus visits through passes, we had almost 47,000 daily admissions. So those are point of sale into the pool facilities. Aquatic Center was over 22,000 of those. Mike Cedar just over 16,000. PV under 4,000. Marion Kreiner, that is an estimate because it is free admission to that pool. We don't necessarily have a specific point of sale count, but our estimate is right under 2,400. And then at Washington, just under 2,300. So each year, on average, we have about 10 sessions throughout the year for swim lessons. And so this year we saw that our swim lesson participation is really starting to ramp up again. Pre-COVID, it was right around the 1,700 figure, totally plummeted, as you can imagine, during COVID, and now we're starting to see the resurgence. Part of that is definitely the addition of swimming lessons at Mike Cedar Pool, which we started for the first time in FY22 in over a decade. So our largest session saw 299 participants. Our smallest session was 96 participants. That was in the middle of the winter when only the Aquatic Center could be utilized for lessons. Average session though is about 170 participants. Outdoor pool merchandise, so it costs us just under $1,500 a year, and we make about $1,700 a year, so not a big business, but a place maybe for some opportunity in the future. This is things like swim goggles, baby diapers for the pool, things like that. Outdoor pool concessions cost us just under about $10,000 with a return of just over $27,000. So again, concessions at the pools do really well for us, and that's some place where we see some opportunity in the future potentially. Mike Cedar, had over $16,000, almost $17,000 in concession sales. PV, $6,600, $2,000, a little over at Washington, and even Marion Kreiner is almost $1,000 in concession sales. You'll notice the Aquatic Center is not here. We don't sell concessions at the Aquatic Center. There are vending machines outside of the area for soda and snacks. Again, potentially an opportunity for us with concessions at aquatics. Private rentals. So this is, when it comes to the Casper Family Aquatic Center, you can do a room rental, such as the party room for a birthday party during open swim hours, or at any of these facilities, you can rent the entire facility for an hour and more blocks of time so that it's private for your party. And so 325 rentals at the Aquatic Center last fiscal year, 2 at Marion Kreiner, 59 at Mike Cedar, 6 at Paradise Valley, and 2 at Washington Park. And to make all of these wonderful things happen, Aquatic staffs 49 minimum people, generally in the winter season, up to 82 employees during that peak of our summer season, and only 2 of those are full-time staff, Edwin, the supervisor, being one of those. And graciously, council approved a full-time rec coordinator position that is specific to aquatics. And so I think that position is going to go a long way in helping us with our subsidy position, but those are the 2 full-time positions we have. So this is a recap of the last 5 years. This was also in the memo, so just kind of a review. So of course we're here. I'm sorry. Hi. Okay. So of course we're here to talk about council goals that you established and give you an update on where we're at with regard to your council goal, which really kind of tasks us with doing a broad-based study, figuring out what we need to do to improve our subsidy position, and particularly if general fund dollars were not available for us to use anymore in our rec enterprises. So the first step in that is to complete a report of all funding sources. So these are the FY23 budgeted funding dollars for the Aquatic Center, and very consistent over the years. So we have admissions, we have our classes or lessons, we have concessions, we have merchandise, our season passes, our private rentals and leases, and then this transfer in is a combination of subsidy from the 1 cent, as well as from the general fund, as well as from interest earned on our perpetual care fund. Okay. So as far as a list of adverse reactions to programs if funding should be cut, really when it comes to aquatics, we would have to close 1 or more of the outdoor pools in order to make up the subsidy. We would have to look at eliminating free swimming altogether, not only at Marion Kreiner, where admission is free, but right now we also allow free admission for anybody under the age of 4, and so we would have to look at perhaps lowering that age limit in order to meet a lower subsidy. And then of course we would have to increase admission rates. We have the rate model that we'll be looking at in a few minutes, but before we do that, again, I want to talk to you a little bit about what our strategies are that we've either recently implemented or plan to implement in order to improve our subsidy position. So of course we want to reduce operational costs. I think you've heard this from me before though, our rec budgets are pretty tight. There's not a lot of fluff in those budgets, and so really the biggest opportunity we have right now, and I mentioned it during Hogan and Fort Casper discussions, but Jill has also recently brought it to you for consideration, and that's to pass on credit card fees to the customer. So in the aquatics fund, we budgeted about $11,000 in FY23 for credit card fees, so that could be a significant savings for us if we were able to pass those fees to the customer. We really want to maximize our efficiency when it comes to our non-full-time staffing, so I've really tasked Edwin and his team with utilizing that non-full-time staff as efficiently as we can and making sure that we're staffing appropriately and at the right times. Replacing inefficient mechanical equipment, so we spend a lot on power and water, and so making sure that our mechanical equipment is up to snuff so that we don't have a lot of waste and leakage, and inefficient equipment is important. And then, of course, seeking grants and partnerships to fund programming. You know, again, we partner with the Community Recreation Foundation quite extensively, but looking at opportunities that I know the team has been working on, perhaps partnering with daycares to see if we can improve programming there. And then also looking at other grant opportunities through Daniels Fund or other grant offerings out there to help us fund some programming so that we don't have to use operational dollars for that. Definitely in this schedule kind of highlights, and I know it's pretty small, but we wanted to demonstrate that there is programming at our pools from, you know, in the case of the Aquatic Center, 6 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night when private parties may be over. So generally speaking, it's jam-packed all day with programming from an aquatic standpoint. And it's just a matter of how we're breaking down this time for our customers and finding an appropriate balance of our open swim versus our lessons versus our fitness swim hours versus the hours that we allow private rentals. That's really going to get us to the best position is just monitoring that, doing the evaluation, trying new things, reevaluating and seeing if it was effective and then changing it if we need to. So this is a continual analysis that will happen. I can tell you that we did reduce our open swim hours this year and got some grief for that. But it does appear that the return on investment was good and that choice helped us in terms of our subsidy. And really we're impacting few customers that used the pools during those times when we inserted lessons instead because they were low use hours at our facilities anyways. So really just these two go in tandem. We want to refine those open swim hours at our outdoor pools and really maximize swim lessons and programming to improve our subsidy position. We want to identify, create, and host events to increase attendance. So as I mentioned, CRF has the one annual event that's free and open to the public. Certainly I think our team could create opportunities to have new events at our aquatics facilities and earn a little bit of revenue while creating fun experiences for our community that include water recreation, which people certainly enjoy. Purchase backup equipment to reduce downtime and closures. So this is one that's been kind of near and dear to me since I started because I came from utility operations where you always had backup for critical infrastructure, and that wasn't necessarily the case in aquatics, but we did budget in fiscal year 23 to purchase several critical pieces of equipment so that we would have backups, which would mean instead of, for instance, the aquatic center being closed for 5 days while we had a pump repaired and reinstalled, it would be closed for half a day while we pulled that pump out, installed a new one, and then had that other one in for repairs. So we are actively working on procuring that equipment, and this is a big one to improve our subsidy because we were closed, the leisure pool was closed over 20 days last year, and those are days that people are not paying admissions to come to the aquatic center. So really want to reduce those downtime and closures as much as we can to maximize our revenue. Again, something that you're going to hear me say throughout all of these presentations is improving our marketing. In this case, it would be of aquatics programming, our lessons and classes, and our rentals. I think a lot of people still don't know that we rent pools to private parties. A lot of people don't know. In fact, when we had a closure at Mike Cedar, we were redirecting people to the aquatic center, and some people were saying, well, where's that? I don't even know where that's at. I didn't know we had an indoor aquatic center. So I think there's still a lot of people in our community that don't know all of the recommended that are available to them, and marketing is key to that, to making sure that people know. And again, an improved website that allows point of sale of passes and different things like that are going to be really important to giving us the boost that we need there. We need to strategically remove, add, and replace aquatic amenities. So you guys know from our previous discussion, we're talking some high dollar investments if we are going to make improvements that will draw, higher visitors or higher use to facilities. And so, but I also think that we need to be strategic about it. Based on the things that I've seen over the last year in my role, something goes down and the reaction is, okay, we need to replace that or we need to fix that, rather than thinking more globally about the rec services that we're offering and identifying whether it actually makes sense to replace that with like or with something else, or to just remove it altogether. So strategically really thinking about those things will become important in the future and drive some of the future hard asks that I may be making to you all. And then, of course, we have to modify our admission rates. And so I'm not proposing that we do that for FY23. Budget's already established and we're in there. But I will show you in the rate model, which Pete's going to graciously run for me again, what that might look like in certain conditions.
Yep.
Thank you. Zelina, have you done any analysis? I'm really interested in the backup equipment element of this, particularly because when the PB went down briefly for a while, and one of the comments was like, well, that sounds like you needed a backup part, and I was like, yeah, it does. So I understand the importance of having those. Do you have any analysis, or could you do analysis about the cost, like how much revenue did we lose through down days throughout? It doesn't have to be super granular, I don't think, but you know, when we're looking at those costs to have backup parts, I think it's important for the council to weigh, like, are they really costs, or are they just preventing revenue loss in the future? And so if we had a number, an estimate, you know, yearly we lose this much revenue due to you know, unexpected
downtime.
closures, I think that would be helpful for us to weigh against, you know, costs that you might bring to us in the future.
Mayor, council member, I absolutely agree, and we did perform some of that analysis when we came to city leadership to request capital funding for FY23. And so, you know, the sad reality is that in the grand scheme of things, an $8,000 pump to keep us from having to close the facility is a really good investment and one that makes a lot of sense to me. So that, and so we were able to show the city manager in our budget discussions that the return on that investment is pretty high when you factor in the 20 days that we wouldn't have had to close had that equipment been in place. And so we have done the analysis to say, okay, what is our single point of failure? And certainly a circulation pump in one of the pools, which is how we treat and heat the pools, is more important than a pump, say, to the water slide, which is sort of an ancillary. Yes, it's nice, but if that goes down, we can close the slide and still have the pool open. So we've kind of done the analysis of all of the critical components and created a capital plan to get those backups coming so that we're not having that loss. And I think in the fiscal year 23 budget, we have 5 of those pumps budgeted and are working on those procurements right now.
Kyle.
Thanks, Ray. Feel free to disregard if I know you're not through your presentation yet, but I'm going to forget if I don't address it with this in front of me. Couple questions. One of them, when somebody's wanting to rent a pool right now, we have no point of sale system on the website. What does that process currently look like?
So as I understand it, so there is a form on the website that you can populate. That gets submitted, it goes to our administrative assistant she works for all of recreation, and then she will contact that person, make the arrangement, take point of sale over the phone or in person if they should come in.
Okay. Thank you.
So we're halfway there.
I'd love to get all the way there.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
I'm curious. We budgeted for, what was that, 488,000 over the course of this next fiscal year. What was that number? 488, 588? I forget what it was. For
the
1 cent.
subsidy?
Yeah, the subsidy.
588.
588.
588. So my question about that was, my understanding was that the last 1 cent cycle was 1.3 million over 4 years. I thought we maintained that this next one.
325 a year.
Yep.
Okay. So, okay, yeah, so I guess that's my question. If we're doing 325 from 1 cent, the rest must be coming from perpetual. So that's not, so the 1.3 million isn't necessarily the true subsidy?
Mayor and council members, so we have the $1.3 million injection over the 4-year period into the fund, so that's $325,000 a year. But then there is subsidy above and beyond that comes from a combination of a general fund infusion as well as interest from our perpetual care fund.
Okay,
And it will show that in the rate model. I didn't break out general fund and perpetual care, although I could get those figures to you. I wanna say, it was just under $100,000 from perpetual care, and then the general fund took up the rest. But the 1 cent infusion is listed separately, so you can see kind of those differences.
Okay, thank you. So it would be safe to assume that 588. Okay. So that's actually the true cost of the subsidy. It's $588,000 a year. Okay. Thank you.
And it is worth mentioning, and you'll see it again in the rate model, that in FY '23 we actually got $375,000 from 1 cent. So that was kind of a deviation from historical, and it will be different from what's moving forward because it will be set at that 325 should 1 cent pass in November.
Okay, thank you. And then one last follow-up, if I may, and you may cover it in a future slide, but I'm assuming some of the pools are more profitable than others. I imagine probably Mike Cedar's probably the most. What have we seen the cost recovery for that pool specifically? I'm just curious, our best performing pool, what does the cost recovery look like for that one?
Mayor, council member, that's actually a good question, and in this presentation we did not do the analysis, but we can.
Okay.
Historically, it has been a challenge because all of the outdoor pools were lumped together. Jill was generous enough in fiscal year '23 to separate those pools out so that we could track the performance of the pools individually. So right now we can extract some information.
We just have the 1 year data.
Yes, and it's somewhat limited. It's easier to see the expense side than it is to see the revenue side, or maybe vice versa. Yeah, vice versa, sorry. So it's easier to separate out what revenues we made than it is to separate out the expenses when they were all lumped together. But certainly moving forward, starting with the end of this current season, we'll be able to see those individually and be able to do that individual analysis for the pools. But certainly, you know, even the data that we are able to extract shows Mike Cedar has a fair cost recovery, and then it goes in order: Mike Cedar, Paradise Valley, and then Washington, and then Grand Corner, of course, which is a fully subsidized operation.
Thank you. I'm glad we made the decision to start tracking those individually.
Yes.
Especially if we talk about adding, you know, amenities and stuff like that. Mike Cedar's the one with all the bells and whistles, and if that one still doesn't even, you know, recover all of its costs, you know, it's just a consideration we need to make. So, would be interested in seeing that at some point in the future. Thank you.
Mayor, council member, I'm happy to provide that in an info packet.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'm turning it over to Fleur to change. I think this is my last slide. Okay, so this should look familiar. We've been using this format for the last couple of presentations. It seems to work pretty well. So just like the others, we have 4 quadrants, and Pete's gonna help you see them all in a minute. But this upper left-hand quadrant just represents our current budget. So you can see, as I mentioned to the council member, 375 is our 1 cent contribution. Our current subsidy contribution, aside from 1 cent, would be $213,614 for current fiscal year. As it was budgeted, expenses and revenue for fiscal year '23 were at 51.9%, and the cost recovery goal for our fund is 58% based on the resolution that you passed in 2018. So this first current optimized tab is where I show you how we're going to get to that 58% with some minimal changes in how we operate. And so this part just populates based on the changes we make below, so that we can make adjustments if we want in real time and sort of see what impact that has. The biggest pieces as far as changes go is we injected a moderate $3,000 new revenue source. So this would be maybe 1 or 2 events that we do that we don't do now that could generate some revenue for the pools. And so there is $1,500 in that area. And then for sponsorship, again, maybe not of a facility, but maybe of an event, we could get a sponsor or donor to contribute some funds that would save our operational costs and generate some new revenue. So that's $3,000 that we add. The $16,000 comes from about $11,000 estimated for credit card fees for the year, as well as $5,000 if we're really strategic about our staffing, I can tell you we were not at our fully authorized count at the end of this fiscal year, and so we already have savings, and I think that that is achievable savings in this fiscal year should we be able to pass those credit card fees along. So then if you scroll down, this is where it becomes more dynamic, and so we make changes here. So we make changes here, so we can do a cost percentage change or cost dollar amount change, and then show usage increase or decrease in all of these areas. And then what we enter here automatically changes the top as well as the sides so that you can see all of the offerings that we have and the cost of all of those offerings now and if we were to change the rates. So under this current optimized, I'm really counting on a marketing strategy with the new team out of the city manager's office as well as others to help us really just push daily admission, annual passes, and potentially some of our classes and merchandise sales. And so again, improvements to our website that will allow online sales, improvements in our marketing strategies, doing some promotions, perhaps combining those with other rec enterprises. I mean, there's a plethora of opportunity that I think we can evaluate to just really increase our usage in order to drive that subsidy down in this optimized model. The one thing that we would look at considering sooner rather than later is right now you get a discount to a class or a lesson session if you have a pass to our pools, and if you do not have a pass to our pools, that price is a little higher. So I'm saying bump that up even more, incent pass purchasing, and boost our revenue at the same time. So that would be a moderate dollar increase. If you see, we scroll down just a little bit, Pete. So right now the classes are really $53. So there are 10 sessions, eight classes. So really a pretty good price for lessons. They're very comparable to what we see people pay for classes at the recreation center and things like that. So, and then here we would recommend, just inflation has been a killer in terms of the cost of food and goods, and so making sure that we adjust for that, and then hopefully bolstering sales a little bit through some better marketing and making sure that we have the right stuff that people want to buy at the right place. So this would be our current kind of optimized model. Questions about this one?
Questions, council?
So then we wanted to look at a model that uses no general fund subsidy. So we're still leaving our 1 cent infusion in place again, because as you established in your resolution, if the 1 cent passes in November, we will have that at least for the next 4 years to work with. So here we're really trying to target a strategy where again, new events and sponsorship dollars become more important. We doubled that amount to $6,000, really using that coordinator to plan these events, to get people excited about coming to the facilities, and creating those new revenue opportunities. Same operational cost reduction. Again, not a lot of wiggle room there, so we only have so much that we can save, and so that's just applied across the board. And then really the reduction in the general fund subsidy comes in changing our rates. So we tried as a team to really do some sincere analysis and give you a representation of what we think we may be able to achieve without raising the prices, particularly of our daily admissions, to a point where people would not pay and we would not get any customers. And so these do apply some nominal increases to the daily rate, hopefully though not to a point where we would not also still be able to utilize marketing and different events and promotions to increase attendance by just a small amount at these facilities. So for a season pass, but all the annual 6 month and 3 months, essentially we're saying pay $2 more a month for your pass, and that could help boost our revenue and reduce the subsidy pretty significantly. Again, that online sale piece hopefully helping us to kick up how many passes we're able to sell very conveniently to the public. And then really increasing the cost of rentals of the facilities. You know, one, we need to increase how much we're renting, and I think that's achieved through improved marketing and making sure that people know that that's even an option. But two, we also see that people that are renting pools out for parties can generally afford to do that, and so an increase of $25 is going to be pretty minimal for them to still have that private party at a facility of their choice. And so we don't feel like this will price us out for that particular market. Then classes, again, so we feel like our classes are really reasonably priced now, but if we needed to increase the cost of our lessons, we would do so at a much higher rate to people without a pass, again, to try to incent more pass sales for folks. And then again, just that inflation rate for concessions and merchandise, and really pushing the sale of those items while people are at our facilities. And so all of this together gets us to a point where we've eliminated the general fund subsidy and the perpetual care subsidy injunctions. So still a $375,000 subsidy, which is substantial, I understand, puts us at about 69% cost recovery for the operation as a whole.
Questions? Bruce?
Probably more of a comment, but I remember, I think it was 50 cents we raised the rate, and we caught a ton of flack over that, a ton of flack. And I'm trying to think, last time I took my family to Thermopolis, I want to say we paid 20 bucks a piece to get in that pool to swim for a couple hours. So $7.50 just doesn't seem out of line to me, especially for some of the amenities you get, like at Mike Cedar, for instance, or even the Aquatic Center, where I take my daughter. It's those are pretty nice places to go, and you can spend the entire day there for $7.50. I mean, I just don't see the issue. You know, I understand the outcry of folks that are used to getting it all free, at, you know, particularly North Casper, and you know, I get it, but I mean, at some point, we got to figure out how to pay for it all, right? One of the problems we have in our community is we are very good. As much as people complain about, oh, that city council and the way they piss away money, we do an awful lot for our constituents. We are spoiled here. We pay fantastic rates for a whole lot of things. And, you know, at some point, I mean, I guess as long as 1 cent passes, we've got the influx to keep the subsidy down. But in the event that it didn't, I think people better start getting prepared for reality.
Amber.
Thank you. You know, the part of this analysis that makes me most excited, or I really appreciate that you've gotten so down into the weeds in terms of operations and places that revenue can be raised, because you know, for me, to the largest extent possible that we can raise revenues and prioritize that over raising rates, I think, you know, one, we're keeping costs down for constituents. Two, we've got more people out active enjoying the you know, the things that we have in our community. And so I'm really my inclination would be to try to implement those things first and immediately, and you know, without changing too many things at once, to where we really can't tell what is it that's most successful and what's not as successful. Because, you know, for me personally, I don't think, I mean, obviously reducing the subsidy to the greatest extent that we can is a worthy goal, but also these types of operations are subsidized, and that's how they are in every community, just like any other service that we offer to constituents. You know, that's the sort of the function that government can provide, is pooling collective resources so that we can have things that, individuals would not necessarily be able to afford on their own. So I think that, I think trying to get to the most efficient sort of business plan that we can here makes a lot of sense, and I think that the things that you've presented are really seem really achievable, seem really realistic. But I would encourage us to kind of take a systematic approach to implementation so we can really continue the analysis and see where we're seeing the biggest bang for our buck, and not mess with rates unless we have to at this moment.
Bruce. I appreciate all the hard work you've put in. You've hit the ground running since you got in this position, and it's really nice to have this kind of information and just the broader view of things and finding ways to try to meet your objectives. It's very much appreciated, I think, not just by me, but by the entire council. It's always nice to have somebody that has that forward thinking and is really working hard to try to get to what the council's asking you to do. So I sure appreciate the hard work. I give you a hard time, but I do it out of jest because I do appreciate what you're doing in your department, certainly.
Yeah, council member, thank you, and I certainly couldn't do it without my team. They're constantly mining data to answer the thousands of questions they're getting from me all the time about, well, why this and how this and how does this work? And so it's really been a team effort, but I appreciate that acknowledgement, and I'm sure they do too.
So I got Michael. Can I get a couple more questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. Michael, Steve, and Kyle.
First, great job. Some of the notes that I took before you presented some of the things, you hit on those. So great job. I appreciate your work on that. Especially like the more marketing on the website. That was one of the keys that I think that needs focused on. And I had a question on the merchandise price points. Your profit margins are so narrow there. Do we need to look at a different supplier to get better wholesale prices on those, or increase our prices?
Yeah, council member, great question, and something that I did fail to address earlier. So particularly with food service, historically our staff has gone to Sam's Club, purchased the goods, and then drove them around to the different facilities, which probably isn't the most efficient. So we are looking at the opportunity to partner or contract with an agency that could hopefully provide the food and beverage at a better price point, but also handle the delivery so that we're not expending the resources to do that either. So we are absolutely examining those. And in terms of merchandise, it would be similar. I don't know that we've identified a vendor that is kind of specific to Aquatic's merchandise, but we definitely need to look at the pricing of the merchandise to make sure that our return is a little bit better, more aligned with industry standards.
Yeah, because that profit margin is
Very small on merchandise especially.
Thank you.
Steve.
I wanted to reiterate what Bruce had said about the presentation and the thought process, and you're trying to run it like a business, which that's wonderful. And wanted to thank you, your staff, and the spreadsheet Meister Meyer.
Meister Meyer.
I'm just driving the truck, I didn't build it.
He
So,
built the original. This was his brainchild, so.
yes, and that's,
We'll give credit.
those are tough to build at times, so, yeah. So we do appreciate
It's
that.
very dynamic, and we will continue to use it in our rate planning forevermore, so it's very helpful. I did have one more tab to show if there are no more questions.
I've got Kyle and Lisa real quick.
You don't get off the hook that easy.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Just a question. So we don't sell any kind of merchandise at the Aquatic Center. Is that because you don't think people would purchase there, or why don't we sell things?
Mayor, council members, so we do sell merchandise at the Aquatic Center, we don't sell concessions.
Oh, okay.
And that's because we have the vending machines. I personally do believe that we could have some opportunity in concessions at Aquatics, but of course that would likely take some capital investment.
Kyle.
Thank you, Ray. And I would totally concur with Bruce and Steve. Really appreciate the work you've done, love the data. My question that I forgot earlier was, you mentioned how closely aligned our pool seasons are with school. Could you speak more to that? What share, could you speak more to that? I mean, once school ends, what does that, what sort of impact does that have on our attendance numbers? How strong is that correlation? Thank you.
Mayor, council member, so, you know, industry-wide, the historical trend has been kind of a Memorial Day to Labor Day sort of holiday when it comes to outdoor pools, right? Or season when it comes to outdoor pools. What we find here in Turner County is that once school starts, then we're paying the electricity to heat a pool and circulate a pool, and for no attendance during the day or very minimal attendance during the day. And then you may have some evening and weekend times, but we also don't have staffing generally available because I would say 70 to 85% of our staff are minors that are going to be in school. So really we have found that staying open beyond when school starts just is not fiscally responsible. Because we're never going to recapture enough to make that a worthwhile endeavor. But we open day after after school ends.
Sure.
So.
Thank you. I just wanted those comments on the record. I fielded quite a few folks that were wondering why our pools close so early, why David Street closes their splash pad so early. Once school starts, who's it for? Nobody's here.
There are other activities that people will re-engage in, and we just see attendance plummet, and it's just not worth the cost to operate.
Thank you.
Bruce. Thanks. On your ideology with the concessions at the Aquatic Center and talking about the investment it would take to, there's already a kitchen up there. It's just on the other side of the building. Would that be not feasible to have open during pool hours? I would think they'd walk down there to get whatever they wanted, and you've already got everything there.
Mayor, council member, so yes, we do have full concessions in the ice arena, and the ice arena is open very similar hours. Not so much in the early morning, but so absolutely patrons could walk over to the ice arena. We don't see that happen much, especially, you know, people in bathing suits that are warm, and then they walk to an ice arena
That
to
makes
get concessions.
That makes, I didn't think of that. That's why I asked, so thank you. Duh.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, though,
Sir.
I think we do have an opportunity, however. And it may be that one of the, you know, sort of the hard recommendations that we would bring forward with a proposal to deal with aquatics and hopefully deal with some increased revenue and so on, would be to do some minor adjustments more on the aquatic side so that we could use the kitchen facilities at the ice arena to get us some product that we could hopefully peddle on the aquatic side in a space that would be appropriate for doing that, and hopefully invite kids over to come and buy their cheesy pretzels and their you know, whatever else they're buying.
I know if there's a time in my life when I'm hungry, it's
Right.
when I'm swimming.
Yeah, exactly.
And that, much more than if I'm at a hockey game.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
it's just unfortunate that the kitchen's on the other end, but if there was a way to, like you said, because vending machines, you lose a lot of your retail money in a vending machine.
Definitely.
So,
Mayor, council member, so to Carter's point, there's also opportunity with staffing that already exists at the ice arena that's accustomed to concession work, you know, transitioning over and working both areas, so.
Well, I think that's a great idea.
There's definitely, I think, some opportunity there.
I think you're on the right path, ma'am.
Open up an internal DoorDash.
There you go.
There you go.
Aquatic Center over to the ice arena. Run it over.
That's a long walk, man. You'd have to get a scooter.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Okay. So we kind of went through this exercise during the 1 cent discussion, but the assignment in council goals was to show what the rates would have to be for us to break even. So 0 subsidy, which means we would have to take that full $588,000 and get to 100% cost recovery. Really this is what rates would have to look like, which compared to what Councilmember Nell was saying about his admission to Thermopolis, for instance, maybe still doesn't sound so bad, but here you're starting to get into you know, the cost that people would go to travel to like a theme park or, you know, a large aqua center And I really believe that this will completely price us out of any customers. And on average, our pool visits 2 to 3 hours. Is that? So I mean, even though people pay for admission and could stay the full 4 hours of open swim, or in some cases even longer, they generally don't. It's generally about a 2 or 3 hour visit. So asking people to pay these kinds of prices for admission, I think would be a pretty hard sell. And again, increases across the board to all of our rentals, and really any hopes at that point of increasing those rentals, depending on how high we had to go, would start to diminish, right? You'd reach a point where people would no longer buy your product or use your service. So it could be done, but with that not without significant rate increases.
Kyle.
Thank you, Ray. That was the only observation I wanted to make, was these are rate increases, working off the assumption that attendance would not decrease, which I think we all agree.
Yes, and we can actually show you, we could punch in some negative numbers here to show you that would quickly start to erode, any savings that we see.
So it looks like, Carter, you need this is kind of somewhat of a informational, wanted some feedback from us and kind of the process that you guys are going to go through, and you guys are going to come back with some hard sell as far as what some of those issues, those bullet points that you guys had talked about or gave to us in our memo. Is that true?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. We like to have these discussions so that you can get a feel for the tools that we're working with, as well as some of the ideas that we're playing around with and so on, so that we can garner some feedback, we can stimulate some thought, and again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, once we get through all these discussions, which I think should be done by the end of the calendar year, we hope to generate some hard proposals for you to consider and what our goals will be and so on. So my hope is that that you will not be satisfied with a status quo approach, because I would tell you, by looking at these enterprises, this brand of enterprise, as critically as you are, there is very little left that you can do to impact the general fund more favorably than considering these at a very critical level. And what I mean is the subsidies that these types of funds require. Remember, when you add up all of these subsidies and so forth, you're talking about $3 million a year that we spend on these kinds of amenities over and above what it is that each takes in by way of revenue and other grants or income sources.
Steve.
Can you do all of the things? Your last statement in here says city staff requests feedback on which subsidy reducing strategies above they approve of. Can you work on all of them?
Mayor, council member, the short answer is yes. But to council member Pollock's point, I think we have to be strategic in how we implement change so that we can gauge how impactful that change actually is. So I think we'll have to evaluate, okay, let's implement these things and see how that impacts, and then let's implement these things and see how that impacts. Because what we don't want to happen is to implement two things that contradict each other and just think they both failed. Right? Well, hopefully we would have a tracking mechanism that would help us vet that out, but we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of the impact and phase it appropriately.
Well, because I noticed it said you wanted, and this said you wanted some direction. So I guess from that standpoint, in answer to your question to Carter, is I would think that we want to look at getting rid of the credit card fees and seeking the grants. I think the redundant equipment is an excellent idea. You've got that in your budget. Balancing the hours of lessons, you've already worked on some of that in your scheduling. That's why I asked if you could do all of them, because it looked like in these that you had bullet pointed right here, you were pretty well already implementing all of those, or trying to, in this first strategy that you proposed up here. And that was why I asked, can you do them all? And then I was gonna say, yeah, that's what we ought to be doing. So that was kind of where I was coming from when I started off with that first question. So I guess that's kind of where I would come from, is I think they were all excellent proposals and definite ways of getting us where we need to be.
Thank you. I would concur with you, Steve, for the most part, but I also appreciate where Zulene was coming from as far as having, like a control group, because I thought of the same thing when we were talking about raising rates and also increasing our marketing. I feel like that'll muddy the results a little bit if we do both of them at the same time, because we may increase attendance, but it's also decreased because we're raising rates, and so those two in particular, I'd be curious to separate somehow, but so yeah, I mean, I concur with both of you, but I would like to try to isolate them to any extent that we can so that we can get a better idea which ones are really working, which ones aren't working.
Mayor, council member, yes, and so again, the short answer is absolutely. We wouldn't have proposed it if we didn't think we could achieve it. But we will plan to take a phased approach. The other direction that I would request is if there are ideas that we haven't thought of. If there's something that you would like us to pursue that we haven't considered in any of these presentations for any of these enterprises, we would welcome that feedback so that we can incorporate them into our business plan and then come back and present our formal business plans, which will likely come with some budget requests, capital or operational or whatever that may look like.
Steve.
I guess the one thing I would be interested in, even though Washington Park is number 3 on the list as far as usage is concerned, 4th. Okay,
It's 4th in terms of cost recovery, but it's
That's what I'm-
last in usage.
Yes,
because
Marion
Marion
Kreiner is, yes, I'm sorry. Cost recovery is really where I was coming from. Do you think that we can help that out by putting in an extra little amenity or something that might help draw a few more people there? Because obviously, well, the other thing, Mike Cedar's in the center of the city, which helps, but you still have a large usage at PV, and I would love to see somehow, and particularly with the passion of the Washington Park people, I would love to somehow see that number come up some. I mean, it's under 3,000, but I think it was, what, 2,400? 22. Okay, it was Marion Kreiner that was 24. But that's extremely low compared to, Paradise Valley for where it's at. So I guess that's where I would really try to push marketing as well, would be there.
So, Mayor, council member, so some of that goes back to those events, right? Maybe, and at the end of the season, we did do a pooch pull party, which was actually quite popular at Washington Park. And so, thinking about innovative ways to get people to come to the pool, particularly that pool could help. I also want to remind you that in another couple of weeks, I'm going to be coming back to you with a resolution to apply for a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant for improvements at Washington Park. And we can't talk about enhancing Washington Park and creating this flagship park where people want to be without talking about the aquatic amenities that we're offering at that facility. So we will garner all the public feedback that we can at our neighborhood meetings and through our survey, but I would suspect that a component will be reimagining what that aquatic facility might look like in the future. Absolutely.
Excellent.
Lisa.
Weren't you going to do something about naming rights on some of these things? Because that was going to help your subsidy.
Mayor, council member, so we did actually go through a lengthy RFP process for sponsorships and naming rights. And in the end, the vendor that we selected actually declined to contract with us. So now we are engaged again with conversations with OVG 360 for a proposal that would allow their dedicated corporate sponsorships staff to help us citywide with our facilities. So we're waiting on a proposal there, but it is absolutely still our intention, because we see opportunity to, gain some sponsorship and naming rights revenue for a number of our facilities and recreation. So yes, still on the horizon, and something that I think is really achievable. Our first round was just not successful.
So it sounds like we'll have staff go ahead and go back and shore up things, some of the suggestions that were offered by the council, take back for you guys, and we'll come bring us back something.
Sounds good, Mr. Mayor.
Swim up bar,
Thanks, Sumi.
Thank you.
like in Mexico.
Thank you, Edwin.
I appreciate it. She wanted new suggestions. I said swim up bar, and she just scoffed at me.
All right, we're a little ahead of the time, which is good. Do agenda review. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, as normal, I will be referring to this document, which hopefully you all have access to, the grid document. As for next week's meeting, just a couple things to let you be mindful of, so that you'll know we're trying to do what it is you're asking us to do. We've got the judge's quarterly update scheduled for the 18th. We also have sort of a mental health status report, if you will, with regard to the activities that we've tried to undertake in public safety in particular, and certainly be prepared to visit about other efforts as well. We also have the first reading of our alarm licensing ordinance that you have spent a lot of time discussing with staff here lately. Moving on to the 25th work session.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
That Evansville, Texas Street Extension Study, is that part of an MPO deal?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, it is indeed.
Okay.
Yep, and it's a part of those program funds that they have access to as well.
Okay.
Through the state. We will have an executive session, by the way, next week on litigation, as well as personnel. So be mindful of that, if you would. As to the work session of the 25th, you can see another number of items there, and potentially a later evening that night as well. The 1 cent community projects process will be discussed that evening, and again, that's just a process discussion, not necessarily an award discussion, as it were. We will also be talking about the North Platte subdivision, potential for master plan. We think we have a funding opportunity to look into that if council so desires. Council goals will also be brought to your attention, kind of a wrap-up debrief, if you will, pertaining to the last 2 years of that effort. And the chief here will be bringing forward some status report as to Station 1 and its potential design for you to weigh in on and see what's happening. For the first, we will be setting a public hearing for the non-discrimination ordinance that we reviewed this evening. That will likely be for the meeting of the 15th. Yep, it looks like the public hearing is slated tentatively there for the 15th, if council agrees. Moving into the work session of the 8th, the ice arena will have its turn with you in a similar way, in a similar discussion to what you saw tonight. But we also plan to bring back some expansion conversation to you, as sort of a continuing conversation that has taken. And also the chief will be ready to talk about fire station safe zones and the potential for cameras on fire stations as well. Again, kind of a follow-up item to a council request. You can see where we're going for the rest of the calendar year almost. Yeah, just about all the way through the calendar year. It is through the calendar year if you look at all your faces of your pages here. I also, however, like to direct you to the future agenda items page. to make sure we haven't let any of your proposed items drop through the cracks, or if indeed you want to enterprise some additional discussion, that we can docket here in the future, the very near future. As you can tell, we're just about jamming up all of our work sessions through the end of the year. A couple other notable items we're going to be bringing forward. We need to talk about water and sewer rates again toward the end of the year. We need to talk about leadership again toward the end of the year, moving into our new year, and those kinds of things. So that is the agenda review for you to consider and ask any questions about.
Anybody have questions, anything? Okay. Carter, anything on legislative front?
Not tonight, Your Honor.
Okay. We'll go council around the table. We'll start with you, Colleen.
I don't really have anything. I was going to check in with the health department, but I think she's back in town or available tomorrow. I think they had some strategic planning, so just wanted to check in with her and see how things were going for the community and have a report for you guys then.
Kyle.
I actually don't have much of anything. I went to Nate Bargatze at the Ford Wyoming Center Sunday night, and it was well attended and a very funny show. So glad we're getting acts like that in. He's very popular and getting more popular, so it's cool to catch him before he's too cool to come hang out here in Casper.
Lisa.
I got to do the proclamation the other day for Ray for the Domestic Violence Awareness Month for October. So other than that,
Thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it.
my pleasure.
Jai, I'll go with you.
I don't have any updates. The monthly Amoco reuse agreement joint powers board meeting is tomorrow, so I will be joining that and can bring updates afterwards, but nothing else from me tonight. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jai. Amber.
Don't have any updates either.
Michael.
Same here, Mr. Mayor.
Steve.
The only thing I have is I was in Houston over the weekend, and I know why I live here.
Absolutely.
At midnight on a weekend, when you would think there would be nobody out, it is still bumper to bumper traffic on 6 lanes, and you're going, ah! So
You should be in bed.
Casper is a very nice place to be.
Yes.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Well, thanks. I found it interesting. I was reading the Farmer's Almanac today, and they are predicting one horribly, very snowy winter this year for us. So you might batten your hatches and prepare for that, because our weather's soon to change. So I see a lot of folks are starting to do a lot of their fall stuff now, so that's good. They're getting ahead of it. I had a phone call yesterday from a concerned citizen asking about the possibility of allowing for public input during work sessions. And his thought was, which you all know him, was that by the time it comes to the city council meeting, it's already been discussed, and he said sometimes he feels like the public may have some more input, some things we didn't think of that should be. So he was asking if there was a way to allow public input during work sessions. And I said, I don't know, but I would certainly ask, and I don't know why we would shy away from that. But so I've asked, so I'll leave that in your lap. And lastly, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Casper moose that was captured out in Evansville. He was dehorned in order to put him in the trailer, and he woke up and escaped out of the trailer. So now, and they were going to go relocate him, and I don't know how much of you are hunters. I'm not a great avid hunter, but my family is. And now we have a bull moose during the peak of the rut who has no way to protect himself when his own chemistry is going to make him want to go mate. And he's going to have to fight other bulls now with no horns on his head. So I would think we would find better ways to transport these animals and make it safer for him. But we did not do a very good job with that one. And they also forage with their horns in the wintertime. They knock stuff off trees in order to eat. Now he won't be able to do that either. So the likelihood of this bull surviving is not very good. So I called the Game and Fish, talked to the guy that made the decision, and he stands by what he decided to do, and I guess that's what he went to school for. But I told him I was gonna come out publicly and tell him I thought it was shameful. I think their job is to protect animals like ours is to protect people, and they didn't do a very good job with that particular animal. So with that said, I have nothing else.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Again, I wanted to thank Lisa for.
What's her name?
No, I usually got like 5 or 6
Oh, wait, I
things.
know.
5 or 6 things. I need that wrote. Lisa for filling in for me for the Domestic Violence Awareness Day, or Awareness Month proclamation. I had a passing in my family I had to attend to and so forth. So it was a last minute thing, made a phone call, and I said, I can't make it. And so I appreciate Lisa stepping up and doing that without prior knowledge, except probably, I don't know, probably a couple hours before, but I do want to express that and say very appreciative of that. The only other thing I had was the public having discourse, especially when we were talking about the non-discrimination ordinance, goes to show that even in this, what I like about when you do municipal, especially something like local government, that you tend to continue to see the humanity in the people that you're sitting next to and you're talking about, and you see those things. And I think that that's one of the things that we lose, obviously, as you go higher into government and that. And so I just appreciate the conversation, I appreciate the passion, but I also appreciate that we can disagree and we can have those things, but we can still walk away and respect one another and see that dignity in each other. And so I do appreciate that about this council and have for a long time. And so just appreciate that and just want to say thank you for a good discussion. And I know that we'll continue to have those discussions, but I appreciate it, and it's been an honor to serve as mayor with this council, especially after today. So thank you so much.
Also, before we forget, if you don't mind, sir, thank you for preparing and whoever was involved in making sure Floor that we were fed tonight with a wonderful meal.
Thank you.
And we appreciate you. Thank you for the cookies. It's always nice to be appreciated and taken care of when we're working these longer hours. So thank you for that.
And we are out 50 minutes. No, it said 9:10 at the end.
Hey, wait, Ray ran a Bruce meeting. We're out of here. Sorry, I had
hour
to do that.
early. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff. Appreciate it.
Really cookies around, Steve.
I almost want